You'll never amount to anything. The door slammed with such force that the small family portrait hanging inside fell and shattered, a fitting metaphor for what remained of our relationship. I stood frozen on our front porch, my few hastily packed belongings scattered at my feet in garbage bags. Just hours after my high school graduation, I was homeless. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The summer rain began to fall, soaking through my thin graduation shirt, but I couldn't move. Shock held me in place as water mingled with the tears streaming down my face. 18 years of life in that house, and it had taken my father less than 20 minutes to erase my existence from it. It started that morning, graduation day, when I'd finally gathered the courage to tell my parents I didn't want to attend the prestigious law school my father had chosen. The one his father had attended, and his father before him. The one that would guarantee me a position at Davis & Associates, the law firm that had consumed my father's life and, by extension, our family's. "Mom, Dad, I need to talk to you about something," I said over our pre-graduation breakfast, my voice steadier than I expected. My mother, Vanessa, looked up from her coffee, her expression already wary. She could always sense when I was about to disrupt the careful peace she maintained. My father, Richard, didn't even lower his newspaper. "Make it quick, Jessica. We need to leave in 20 minutes. I took a deep breath. I've decided not to attend Westridge Law School in the fall. The newspaper lowered slowly, revealing my father's stone-cold eyes. "Excuse me?" "I've been accepted to Hillcrest Arts Institute on a partial scholarship. I'm going to study photography and digital media." The silence that followed felt endless. My mother's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. "Photography." My father's voice was dangerously quiet. "You're throwing away a $200,000 education and your future at the firm for pictures." "It's not just pictures, Dad. It's storytelling." "It's art. It's garbage." His fist came down on the table so hard the silverware jumped. "No daughter of mine is wasting her life on some artistic fantasy. You will attend Westridge as planned." "I've already accepted Hillcrest's offer," I said, my voice now trembling, "and declined Westridge." My father's face turned an alarming shade of crimson. "You did what? Without discussing it with us first?" "I tried to discuss it with you. For months. You wouldn't listen." "Richard," my mother finally intervened. "Maybe we should stay out of this, Vanessa." My father stood up, towering over the breakfast table. "You've always coddled her, and look where it's gotten us." I stood too, unwilling to be intimidated. "This is my life, Dad, not yours." "Your life?" He laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor. "Who do you think has paid for everything in your life? Who worked 60-hour weeks to put food on this table? To put you in the right schools? To set you up for success? I never asked for any of that. You ungrateful little—" He caught himself, lowering his voice to a controlled simmer that was somehow more frightening. "Fine. You want to make your own decisions? You can pay for them too. If you're not going to Westridge, you're not living under this roof." My mother gasped. "Richard, you can't mean that. It's her graduation day." "I've never been more serious," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. "She wants independence? She's got it. As of today." I thought he was bluffing, a scare tactic to get me back in line. Even as I walked across the stage hours later to receive my diploma, I believed he would cool off, that my mother would talk sense into him. But when we returned home, there were 3 garbage bags waiting in the entryway. My father pointed to them with cold efficiency. "I've packed your essentials. You have 10 minutes to add anything else you need, then you're out." My mother wrung her hands, tears in her eyes, but said nothing, her silence a betrayal all its own. "Dad, please." I tried one last time. "Can we just talk about this?" There's nothing to talk about. You've made your choice, and I've made mine." His voice was mechanical, as if he were terminating an underperforming employee rather than disowning his only child. "I've worked too hard building something for this family to watch you throw it all away." "The family business was never my dream," I said quietly. "It was always yours." Something flickered across his face, hurt, perhaps, or recognition. But it was quickly replaced by the hard mask I'd grown up fearing. "Then you're no longer part of this family. We've given you everything, and you've chosen to throw it all back in our faces. You'll see how far your art gets you in the real world. You'll never amount to anything without the Davis name behind you." I looked to my mother, a final plea. "Mom?" She stepped forward hesitantly, slipping something into my hand, a small envelope. "I'm sorry, Jessica," she whispered, her eyes downcast. "Your father is. He just wants what's best for you." "This isn't about what's best for me," I said, my voice breaking. "It's about his pride." My father grabbed my arm roughly, steering me toward the door. "Time's up." And just like that, I was outside, the door slamming behind me, cutting me off from everything I'd ever known. The rain continued to fall as I stood on the porch, staring at the imposing colonial house that had never really felt like home. Through the window, I could see my mother sitting on the stairs, her head in her hands. My father was nowhere to be seen. I opened the envelope my mother had pressed into my hand. Inside was $500 in cash and a small note. "I'm sorry. Be safe. Love, Mom." Not enough to stand up to my father, but enough to slip me some emergency cash. It was so perfectly emblematic of our relationship that I almost laughed. With shaking hands, I gathered my garbage bags and began walking. I had no car. My father had made sure the one I drove was in his name, and no destination. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from my best friend Zoe. "How'd the big reveal go? Still coming to the grad party?" I stared at the message, tears blurring my vision. How could I explain that in the span of a few hours, my entire life had collapsed? That I was now walking in the rain with everything I owned stuffed in garbage bags? Instead, I typed, "Need a place to stay. Emergency." Zoe's response was immediate. "My door's always open. What happened?" "Tell you when I get there," I replied, adjusting the heavy bags in my hands and starting the 3-mile walk to her house. With each step, the reality of my situation sank in deeper. I had no home, limited funds, no car, no family support, just a dream that my father was certain would lead to failure. As I walked through the affluent neighborhood where I'd grown up, past manicured lawns and luxury cars, I felt like a ghost, invisible, disconnected, no longer belonging. The weight of my father's prediction pressed down on me. "You'll never amount to anything." Rain-soaked and exhausted, I finally arrived at Zoe's door. Before I could even knock, it swung open, and Zoe stood there, her celebration clothes exchanged for casual wear, her expression shifting from excitement to shock as she took in my appearance. "Holy shit, Jessica, what happened to you?" I tried to answer, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I just stood there, dripping and broken on her doorstep. Zoe didn't ask any more questions. She simply pulled me inside, took the garbage bags from my hands, and called out to her parents. "Mom! Dad! Jessica's staying with us tonight." As Zoe's parents emerged from the kitchen, concern written across their faces, I realized this was the first moment of my new life. A life I would have to build from, scratch with no blueprint and no safety net. In that moment, soaked to the bone and shivering in my friend's entryway, I made a silent promise to myself. I would prove my father wrong. His words, "You'll never amount to anything," would not be a prophecy. They would be a challenge. Little did I know then, standing with everything I owned in 3 garbage bags, that 10 years later I would find myself on that same porch again. Only next time, I would have the keys. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Zoe's family welcomed me with a warmth that made my throat tighten with emotion. Mrs. Reynolds wrapped me in a towel the moment I stepped into their home, while Mr. Reynolds carried my garbage bags to their guest room without a single prying question. Their silent understanding was a stark contrast to the cold dismissal I'd just experienced from my own parents. "You can stay as long as you need," Mrs. Reynolds said firmly after I'd changed into dry clothes. She placed a mug of hot chocolate in my hands, the same way she had when Zoe and I were children having sleepovers. No one should be thrown out on their graduation day. I could tell from her tone that she already knew more about my situation than I'd shared. The Reynolds and Davis families had moved in the same social circles for years. Word would spread quickly that Richard Davis had disowned his only daughter over her college choice. Zoe sat cross-legged on the bed beside me, her graduation cap still perched at an angle on her head, forgotten in the chaos. "I can't believe he actually did it," she said, her voice a mix of anger and disbelief. "I mean, I know your dad's intense about the whole legacy thing, but this is next-level cruel." I stared into my mug, watching the marshmallows slowly dissolve. I knew he'd be upset. I just didn't think he'd... My voice broke. "Cut you off completely?" Zoe finished for me. "Yeah, that's some Dickensian garbage right there." Despite everything, I found myself smiling weakly at her literary reference. Zoe had always been the English nerd to my budding photographer. We'd met in 7th grade when I was assigned to take pictures for the school literary magazine she edited. We'd been inseparable ever since. "What am I going to do now?" I whispered, the reality of my situation hitting me in waves. "I have enough saved for maybe 2 months of rent somewhere cheap, and then what? My scholarship only covers tuition, not housing or food." "You're going to stay here until we figure it out," Zoe said decisively. "Mom and Dad already said so while you were in the shower. They're not going to let you end up homeless because your dad's being a jackass." I should have felt relief, but instead, a different emotion washed over me. Shame. The Davis family didn't accept charity. We were the ones who chaired fundraisers and made donations, not the ones in need. My father's voice echoed in my head. "A Davis stands on their own 2 feet. I can't impose on your family like that," I protested weakly. Zoe rolled her eyes. "It's not imposing when you're invited. Besides, it's just until the dorms open in August." "The dorms?" I looked at her in confusion. "At Hillcrest. You're still going, right? That's what this whole apocalypse was about." I hadn't even thought that far ahead. Would I even be able to attend Hillcrest now? The partial scholarship wouldn't be enough without my parents' financial support. "I don't know if I can afford—" "You can and you will," Zoe interrupted. "We'll figure out the money part. Student loans, work-study, whatever it takes. But you're not giving up your dream just because your dad decided to be a total—" A gentle knock at the door cut her off. Mrs. Reynolds peeked in, holding a cordless phone. "Jessica, honey, your mother's on the phone." My heart leapt. Had my mother finally stood up to my father? Was she calling to say I could come home? I took the phone with trembling hands. "Mom?" "Jessica." My mother's voice was strained, as though she was trying to stay composed. "Are you somewhere safe?" "I'm at Zoe's." "Good, good." She paused, and I could hear her take a shaky breath. "I wanted to make sure you're all right." "I'm not all right, Mom," I said, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. "Dad kicked me out. How could I possibly be all right?" "I know, sweetheart. I know. I'm trying to talk to him, but you know how he gets when he makes up his mind." The familiar excuse. My entire childhood had been punctuated by variations of, "You know how you're father gets whenever he made unreasonable demands or lost his temper. So you're just going along with it? I asked, my voice hardening. Your only daughter gets thrown out with garbage bags and you're just… What? Hoping Dad calms down eventually? It's more complicated than that, Jessica. It's really… Not, Mom. Either you think what he did was wrong, or you don't. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Of course I think it's wrong, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I can't just… Can't just what? Stand up to him? Take my side for once? The words poured out of me, years of swallowed resentment finally finding voice. You watched him throw me out, Mom. You didn't stop him. You didn't even try. I gave you money, she said defensively. $500 and a note saying, sorry. That's what 18 years of being your daughter is worth? I heard a muffled sound that might have been a sob. What do you want me to do, Jessica? The question hung in the air. What did I want? I wanted her to leave him, to choose me, to be the mother I needed rather than the wife he demanded. But I knew she wouldn't. She never had. Nothing, I said finally, the fight draining out of me. I don't want you to do anything. You've made your choice pretty clear. That's not fair. None of this is fair, Mom, but here we are. Another silence stretched between us, filled with all the things neither of us had the courage to say. Your father will come around, she said eventually, falling back on her standard reassurance. He just needs time. And what am I supposed to do until then? Live out of garbage bags at my friend's house? The Reynolds are good people. They'll take care of you until… Her voice trailed off. Until what, Mom? Until Dad decides I'm worthy of being his daughter again? Until I give up my dreams and do what he wants? Until things settle down, she finished lamely. I closed my eyes, suddenly exhausted. I have to go. Jessica, please. Goodbye, Mom. I hung up before she could respond, before I could hear any more excuses or feeble attempts at comfort that didn't actually change anything. Zoe, who had been pretending not to listen from the other side of the room, approached cautiously. That bad? I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. She's not going to help, is she? Zoe asked softly. She's never going to choose me over him, I said, the final realization settling over me like a weighted blanket. She never has, and she never will. Zoe wrapped her arms around me as the tears I'd been holding back finally broke free. I cried, for the home I'd lost, for the mother who couldn't protect me, for the father whose approval I'd spent 18 years chasing only to be discarded when I finally chose my own path. That night, lying in the Reynolds guest bed, I stared at the ceiling and tried to process the seismic shift that had occurred in my life. Yesterday, I had been Jessica Davis, daughter of Richard and Vanessa Davis, with a clear, if unwanted, path laid out before me. Today I was. Who, exactly? My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from my father. Your tuition payment for Westridge has been canceled. Your car insurance and phone will remain active until the end of the month. After that, you're on your own. No, are you safe? No, I was angry, but we can talk. Just practical matters, wrapped in the cold finality of his decision. I stared at the message until the screen went dark, then light again as another text came through. This one from my cousin Natalie. Just heard what Uncle Richard did. That's so messed up. Are you okay? Word was spreading through the family. Already. By tomorrow, everyone would know that Richard Davis had cut off his daughter for choosing photography over law. I didn't respond to either message. Instead, I opened my email and navigated to the acceptance letter from Hillcrest Arts Institute. I read it over and over, reminding myself that this dream that had cost me so much had to be worth it. Another text buzzed through, this time from a number I didn't recognize. Hey, It's Ryan from Calculus. Heard about what happened with your dad. That really blows. If you need anything, let me know. And then another, from my debate team partner. Jessica, everyone's talking about what your dad did. So unfair. We're all here for you. And another, and another. News traveled fast in our small, affluent town where appearances meant everything. By morning, I would be the subject of every gossip circle and pitying conversation. I turned my phone off, unable to bear the weight of others' concern or curiosity. In the darkness of the guest room, surrounded by borrowed comfort, the full force of my abandonment crashed over me. I was alone, truly alone in a way I had never been before. Yet somewhere beneath the pain and fear, a tiny spark of defiance flickered to life. My father had cast me out, believing I would fail without his support, without the Davis name opening doors for me. He expected me to come crawling back, humbled and repentant. I made a vow in that moment, teeth clenched against a fresh wave of tears. I would never give him that satisfaction. I would build my own life, forge my own path, and succeed so thoroughly that one day, Richard Davis would be forced to recognize what he had thrown away. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known as I lay in that unfamiliar bed with my world in pieces around me, was that the path from that moment of absolute abandonment to vindication would be longer and harder than I could possibly imagine. The Reynolds family was wonderful, but I couldn't stay in their guest room forever. 2 weeks after graduation, I sat at their kitchen table surrounded by newspaper classifieds, my laptop open to apartment listings I couldn't afford, and a growing sense of desperation. "Nothing?" Zoe asked, peering over my shoulder at the circled listings, all well beyond my budget. "Nothing under $800 a month that isn't in a neighborhood where I'd need armed guards," I sighed, running my hands through my hair. "And I still need to figure out how to pay for books, food, and everything else at Hillcrest." The financial reality of my situation was becoming clearer each day. My partial scholarship would cover about 60% of my tuition, but nothing else. Student loans could help, but without a co-signer, my options were limited. My father had made sure of that by informing the extended family that anyone who helped me would be cut off as well. Mrs. Reynolds placed a cup of coffee in front of me. "You'll find something, dear. The right opportunity always shows up when you need it most." I smiled weakly at her optimism, wishing I could share it. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. The screen showed Uncle Robert, and my heart jumped. My father's younger brother had always been different from the rest of the Davis clan, more relaxed, less obsessed with status and appearance. He'd been living abroad for the past few years, working for an international humanitarian organization. "Uncle Robert, hi. Jessica, my favorite niece. How are you holding up? I just heard about what happened." His voice, warm and concerned, nearly broke my composure. "I'm managing, staying with a friend for now." "That's what I figured. Listen, I'm back in the States for a few weeks. Can we meet for lunch today? I'd like to talk to you about something." 2 hours later, I sat across from Uncle Robert at a small cafe downtown, far from the upscale restaurants my father frequented. At 45, Robert looked like a more relaxed version of my father. Same strong jawline and dark eyes, but with laugh lines instead of stress furrows. "You look good, Jess, considering everything." I shrugged. "Appearances can be deceiving. The Davis family's specialty, right?" He winced. "Fair point. Your father has always excelled at keeping up appearances." He leaned forward, eyes serious. "What he did to you was wrong. Completely wrong. I want you to know that." The simple validation brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you. That means a lot." "I've spoken to him," Robert continued. "It didn't go well. He's convinced you'll come crawling back once you realize how difficult it is out there." I set my jaw. "Never." Robert smiled. "That's my girl. I told him the same thing. You've got too much spine to give in to his tactics. He took a sip of his coffee. Which brings me to why I wanted to meet. I have a proposition for you. Proposition? I own a small apartment building on Cedar Street. Nothing fancy, but solid. There's a studio apartment opening up next month. It's yours if you want it. I blinked in surprise. I didn't even know you owned property here. It was Grandma's originally. I kept it as an investment when I moved abroad. Your father doesn't know about it. We haven't exactly been close since I chose humanitarian work over joining the family firm. My mind raced. Cedar Street was a decent area, close to downtown and the bus line to Hillcrest. Uncle Robert, that's incredibly generous, but I can't accept charity. I need to stand on my own feet. He laughed. Who said anything about charity? You'll pay rent, but at a reasonable rate that a working student can afford. And speaking of working, he reached into his messenger bag and pulled out a business card. My friend Elaine owns a photography studio downtown. She needs an assistant. The pay isn't great, but you'd be learning from one of the best commercial photographers in the state. I stared at the card in disbelief. Elaine Cortez Photography. I knew the name. Her work was featured in national magazines and advertising campaigns. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Robert urged. The apartment will be $400 a month, utilities included. The job pays $12 an hour. Part-time schedule that works around your classes. The math ran quickly through my head. It would be tight, but with student loans for the remaining tuition and careful budgeting, I could make it work. Why are you doing this? I asked, still stunned by his generosity. Robert's expression softened. Because 18 years ago, I made choices your father couldn't accept or understand. I know what it's like to be cut off by Richard Davis for following your own path. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. And because you're my niece, and I believe in your talent. You've seen my photography? He nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. I follow your Instagram. Those urban decay shots you did for your final project? Incredible composition. You've got a real eye, Jess. Tears welled up again, this time from gratitude rather than pain. Someone in my family, someone with the same blood as my father, believed in me. Under one condition, I said, finding my voice. Name it. I pay the full market rent as soon as I can afford it. And this is a loan, not a gift. I'll pay you back for any difference. Robert grinned. Stubborn independence. Another trait we share. He extended his hand. Deal. The next day, Uncle Robert drove me to meet Elaine Cortez. Her studio occupied the renovated top floor of an old factory building, with exposed brick walls, massive windows, and the kind of natural light photographers dream about. Elaine herself was nothing like I expected. In her late 50s, with a shock of silver hair cut in a sharp bob, she wore paint-splattered jeans and spoke with the slight rasp of a long-time smoker who'd finally quit. So you're Robert's niece, she said, eyeing me critically. He says you've got talent. I'm still learning, I replied honestly. She nodded approvingly. Good answer. The ones who think they already know everything are useless to me. She gestured around the studio. I need someone who can learn fast, work hard, and not complain about mundane tasks. Some days you'll be adjusting lighting for a corporate headshot. Other days you'll be organizing equipment or making coffee runs. I can do that. Pay is $12 an hour to start. 20 hours a week, schedule varies. More during holiday seasons, when we're slammed, less during midterms and finals because I'm not competing with your education. She crossed her arms. Still interested? Absolutely. Robert mentioned your situation. Parents cut you off because you chose art over law. Right? I nodded, uncomfortable with how much Uncle Robert had shared. Been there, Elaine said simply. My old man wanted me to be a dental hygienist, practical, respectable, steady income. She shrugged. Lasted 6 months before I quit to pursue photography. He didn't speak to me for 5 years. What happened after 5 years? He saw my work in National Geographic. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. Hard to argue with that. Over the next month, my life transformed. I moved into the small but clean studio apartment in Uncle Robert's building. Zoe and her parents helped me furnish it with secondhand finds and a few essential gift items they insisted on. I started working at Elaine's studio, soaking up knowledge like a sponge, grateful for the opportunity to learn from someone so accomplished. For the first time in my life, I was completely independent. No family name to fall. Back on, no safety net. Every decision was mine alone to make, every consequence mine to bear. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. News of my arrangement with Uncle Robert eventually reached my parents. My mother called one evening, her voice tight with what sounded like hurt. "So Robert has taken you in," she said without preamble. "Against your father's wishes." "Uncle Robert helped me find an apartment and a job," I corrected. "I'm supporting myself." "Your father is very upset. Robert has betrayed the family." I laughed bitterly. Betrayed the family? By helping your daughter avoid homelessness? What does that make you, Mom, for letting Dad kick me out in the first place? Her silence spoke volumes. "Is that why you called? To guilt me about accepting help from Uncle Robert?" "I called because I miss you," she said quietly. "The house is so empty without you." A pang of homesickness hit me unexpectedly. Despite everything, I missed my mother too. The good moments, rare as they were when my father's influence didn't overshadow her natural warmth. "You know where I am," I said softly. "You can visit any time. Without Dad." "You know I can't do that," she whispered. "He would never forgive me. And I'm not sure I can forgive you for choosing his approval over my well-being." The words hurt to say, but they were true. "I have to go, Mom. I have an early shift tomorrow." As I hung up, I realized something important. The abandonment I had experienced wasn't just my father throwing me out. It was my mother's silent compliance, her unwillingness to stand up for me, her commitment to keeping the peace at any cost, even the cost of her relationship with her only child. But where one door had closed, others had opened. Uncle Robert's unexpected alliance had given me more than just material support. It had shown me that I wasn't alone, that my path was valid, that someone in my family believed in my dreams enough to invest in them. As I prepared for my first semester at Hillcrest, I pinned a note above my desk, a reminder on the difficult days that would surely come. "You'll never amount to anything." Richard Davis. It wasn't a taunt or a prophecy. It was fuel for the fire that would drive me forward, one day at a time. Fall semester at Hillcrest Arts Institute began with a whirlwind of emotions. The campus, a collection of renovated industrial buildings converted into modern arts facilities, hummed with creative energy. Students carried portfolios instead of traditional backpacks. Professors wore paint-splattered clothes rather than tweed jackets, and conversations in the hallways revolved around light composition and narrative themes instead of football scores. It was everything I had dreamed of and fought for, and I was terrified I didn't belong. "You look like you're about to bolt," Zoe observed during her first visit to my apartment. She had enrolled at State University, only 30 minutes away, majoring in English literature. "This place suits you, though, very artsy photographer chic." I glanced around my tiny studio. I had done my best with limited resources. Thrift store furniture, string lights, and prints of my own photography adorning the walls. It wasn't much, but it was mine. "I keep waiting for someone to realize I don't deserve to be here," I admitted, arranging mugs of instant coffee on my secondhand coffee table. "Everyone else seems so confident, like they've been artists their whole lives." "And you haven't?" Zoe raised an eyebrow. "Jess, You've been taking photos since your 10th birthday when your mom got you that little point and shoot. Remember when you documented every single flower in the botanical garden? 300 photos, and you labeled all of them. I smiled at the memory. Dad called it a waste of time. And yet you kept going. That's the difference between you and half those confident students. You've already faced opposition and chosen to continue anyway. That counts for something. Her words stayed with me as I navigated those first challenging months. Balancing full-time studies with my job at Elaine's studio pushed me to my limits. I woke at 5 a.m. to study, attended classes until mid-afternoon, then worked until evening. Weekends were split between additional shifts at the studio and coursework. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't often afford. Financial reality hit hard and fast. Despite my careful budgeting, unexpected expenses kept arising. Specialized photography paper that cost 3 times what I'd budgeted, a required lens for a particular class, software updates I couldn't do without. My small savings dwindled rapidly. One Wednesday in late October, I stood in a grocery store aisle staring at the price of pasta, calculating whether I could make $27 last until payday. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Thinking of you. Hope school is going well." These occasional messages were the extent of our communication now, brief, superficial texts that avoided addressing the rift between us. I never responded. As I placed the cheapest pasta option in my basket, I spotted a familiar figure at the end of the aisle. Natalie, my cousin from my father's side of the family, was examining a jar of sauce. My first instinct was to hide. I hadn't seen any family members except Uncle Robert since graduation. Before I could retreat, she looked up. "Jessica?" Too late. "Hi, Natalie." She approached hesitantly, as though unsure of her welcome. "How are you? We've all been wondering." "I'm fine," I replied automatically, conscious of my shabby sweater and the meager contents of my shopping basket. "Really? Because you look exhausted." Her bluntness was refreshing after months of carefully constructed facades. I sighed. "I am exhausted, but I'm managing." Natalie bit her lip. "Look, I know Uncle Richard has forbidden everyone from helping. But this is ridiculous. Your family. Not according to him. Well, he doesn't speak for all of us." She glanced around as if worried we might be overheard. "Are you free for dinner tonight? My place?" That evening, I discovered that Natalie's invitation wasn't just about reconnecting. It was an organized act of family rebellion. At her apartment, I found Uncle Robert, Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister, and my cousins Derek and Lindsay. "What is this?" I asked, overwhelmed by the unexpected family gathering. "Dinner," Natalie said simply, "and a conversation we all need to have." Over lasagna and salad, my relatives shared their frustration with my father's edict against helping me. "Richard has always been controlling," Aunt Patricia said. "But this crosses a line. You're his daughter, for heaven's sake." "He's made his position clear," I replied, the hurt still raw. "I'm only his daughter if I follow his rules." "Which is precisely why we're here," Uncle Robert interjected. "Your father may have cut you off, but we haven't. We've created a family fund to help you through school." I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. "A what?" "Nothing excessive," Aunt Patricia clarified. "Just enough to ensure you can eat properly and buy your supplies without working yourself to exhaustion. We're all contributing what we can." "I can't accept that," I protested. "What Dad doesn't know won't hurt him," Derek interrupted. "We're being discreet." "This isn't about defying Uncle Richard," Lindsay added. "It's about doing what's right for you." Tears welled in my eyes. I don't know what to say. "Say you'll accept the help," Natalie urged. "Say you'll let us be your family, even if your parents are being difficult." The support was overwhelming. After months of feeling cast aside by my family, Here was evidence that the ties weren't completely severed. I agreed to accept their help, but with conditions. The money would be a loan, not a gift, and I would repay every cent once I was established in my career. Their support eased my financial burden, but other challenges remained. Studio critiques at Hillcrest were brutally honest affairs that often left me questioning my abilities. Professor Harlow, who taught advanced composition, seemed particularly unimpressed by my work. Technically proficient but emotionally disengaged, she announced during one particularly painful critique. You're playing it safe, Ms. Davis. Great photography requires risk, vulnerability. You're hiding behind your camera instead of using it to reveal truth. Her words stung because they hit on something I'd been avoiding confronting, the emotional walls I'd built since being cast out by my parents. I was approaching photography with technical precision, but holding back the messy, painful parts of myself that might actually connect with viewers. That night, I couldn't sleep. Professor Harlow's criticism circled in my mind alongside my father's dismissal. You'll never amount to anything. Was I proving him right by playing it safe? Was I sabotaging my own growth because I was afraid of failing and confirming his prediction? At 2 a.m., I got up, grabbed my camera, and drove to my childhood neighborhood. I parked a block away from my parents' house and walked slowly toward it, heart pounding. The Grand Colonial stood dark and imposing against the night sky, just as it had the evening I was forced to leave. I raised my camera and began to shoot, not just the house itself, but details I'd never noticed growing up. The way the security light cast prison bar shadows across the manicured lawn, the cold symmetry of the windows, the emptiness of a home designed to impress rather than welcome. For hours, I photographed the symbols of my childhood imprisonment and ultimate rejection, moving from technical documentation to increasingly abstract and emotional images as the night progressed. When dawn began to break, I had hundreds of raw, unfiltered photographs and tear-stained cheeks. The resulting series titled Foreclosure became my midterm project. Professor Harlow stood silent before the displayed prints during our class evaluation, studying each image carefully. This, she finally said, tapping one particularly haunting shot of the family crest on the front gate, is what I've been waiting to see from you. Whatever emotional dam was holding you back has broken. Keep this honesty in your work going forward. That project marked a turning point in my artistic development. I began exploring themes of belonging, rejection, and identity in my photography. Each assignment became an opportunity to process another aspect of my ongoing emotional journey. For the first time, I wasn't just taking pictures. I was telling my story through visual language. Elaine noticed the change in my work as well. She began assigning me more complex tasks at the studio and occasionally featuring my perspective during client consultations. You're developing a distinct style, she observed one evening as we packed up equipment after a shoot. Good. Generic. Photographers are a dime a dozen. The ones who make it have a signature, something that makes their work immediately recognizable. By the end of that first semester, I had settled into a rhythm. The practical challenges of independent living became routine rather than overwhelming. I learned to cook cheap, nutritious meals, maintain my small apartment, and stretch every dollar. The family fund ensured I could buy necessary supplies without skipping meals, while my job with Elaine provided invaluable experience and connections. Christmas approached with a hollow ache. For weeks, I debated whether to reach out to my parents, despite everything. In mid-December, I finally sent my mother a text. Would it be possible to meet for coffee before Christmas? Her response came hours later. Your father isn't ready. Maybe after the holidays. The rejection reopened wounds I thought had begun to heal. I spent Christmas Day with Zoe's family, who welcomed me warmly, but the absence of my own parents cast a shadow over the celebration. That night, alone in my apartment, I allowed myself one evening of grief. For the family I'd lost, for the relationship with my parents that might never be repaired, for the parts of myself I'd had to change. In order to survive. The next morning, I rose early, made coffee, and returned to my photography projects with renewed determination. The adjustment period wasn't over. Perhaps it never would be completely. But I was learning to build a life around the hole my parents had left. I was discovering parts of myself that might have remained dormant if I'd followed my father's prescribed path. When January arrived, bringing the start of a new semester and new artistic challenges, I realized something important. I wasn't just adjusting to my circumstances anymore. I was growing beyond them. 2 years passed in a blur of classes, work, and incremental successes. By my junior year at Hillcrest, I had established myself as one of the top photography students in the program. My Foreclosure series had been selected for the Student Gallery Showcase, earning recognition from faculty and visiting artists alike. Elaine had promoted me to lead assistant, entrusting me with client interactions and even some independent shoots for smaller projects. I rarely thought about my parents anymore, or so I told myself. The truth was more complicated. Their absence remained a constant ache, dulled by time, but never completely healed. I hadn't spoken to my father since graduation night, and conversations with my mother had dwindled to occasional superficial text exchanges on birthdays and holidays. Then came the phone call that shattered my carefully constructed equilibrium. "Jessica?" My mother's voice trembled on the line, something I hadn't heard since the night I was thrown out. "Your father's had a heart attack." The world tilted, sideways. Despite everything, my first instinct was fear, raw and primal. "Is he..." "He's stable. They did an emergency procedure, a stent. He's in the cardiac unit at Mercy General." I sat down heavily on my apartment sofa, emotions colliding inside me. Concern for his health, anger at the reminder of his rejection, uncertainty about what this meant for our estrangement. "Jessica, are you still there?" "Yes," I managed. "I'm here." "He's asking for you." Those 4 words hung in the air between us. After 3 years of silence, my father wanted to see me. Was it genuine reconciliation he sought, or merely the perspective shift that often comes with confronting mortality? "I don't know if I can," I whispered. "Please," my mother urged. "He may not." She stopped herself, but the unfinished thought lingered. "He may not have another chance." "I'll think about it," I said finally, unable to commit either way. After hanging up, I paced my apartment, torn by conflicting impulses. Part of me wanted to rush to his bedside, desperate for reconciliation. Another part feared walking back into that dynamic of conditional love and approval. I called Uncle Robert for advice. "You need to do what's right for you, Jess," he said, after listening to my dilemma. "Not what's right for him or your mother." "But what if he..." I couldn't finish the sentence. "If the worst happens and you didn't go? Yes, you might regret it. But going doesn't mean surrendering your boundaries or forgetting what happened. You can see him on your terms." His words clarified something. For me. I could face my father without reverting to the obedient daughter he had expected me to be. I could enter that hospital room as the person I had become, an artist, a working professional, a woman who had survived his rejection and built a life anyway. The next morning, I stood outside the cardiac care unit, gathering my courage. Through the glass, I could see my father, diminished in a hospital bed, medical equipment surrounding him, my mother sitting beside him. She spotted me and hurried out to the hallway. "Jessica, thank you for coming." She embraced me awkwardly, our relationship too damaged for genuine warmth. "He's been asking for you all night." "I'm not staying long," I warned, setting an immediate boundary. "And I'm not here to pretend everything's fine between us?" She nodded, eyes downcast. I understand. Just be gentle. He's been through a lot. So have I thought but didn't say. When I entered the room, my father's eyes were closed. He looked older, frailer than I remembered, his commanding presence reduced by illness and hospital surroundings. His eyes opened as I approached the bed, widening slightly in recognition. Jessica. His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. Dad. The word felt strange on my tongue after so long. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us, 3 years of estrangement creating a chasm too wide for small talk. You came? He finally said. Mom said you asked for me. He nodded slightly, wincing at the movement. The doctors say I need to avoid stress, to make peace with things. He attempted a weak smile. Apparently, being angry all the time is bad, for your heart. The attempted humor fell flat. I remained standing, arms crossed defensively. You look well, he continued, studying me. Healthy. I am well, I confirmed. I'm succeeding at Hillcrest. I have a good job at a photography studio. I have my own apartment. Your mother told me. Robert has been helpful. The slight edge in his voice when mentioning Uncle Robert revealed his lingering disapproval. Some things hadn't changed. Uncle Robert believed in me when you didn't, I said quietly. He gave me a chance when you threw me away. My father winced as if my words caused physical pain. I didn't throw you away. I was trying to guide you toward a better path. By kicking me out with no warning? By cutting me off completely? The anger I'd suppressed for years rose to the surface. That wasn't guidance, Dad. That was punishment for not obeying you. I admit I reacted strongly, he conceded, surprising me. But you have to understand, Jessica. I wanted security for you. Photography is such an uncertain field. You didn't want security for me. You wanted control over me. The words tumbled out. 3 years of unspoken truth finally finding voice. You wanted me to follow the path you chose, to live the life you designed. You never once asked what I wanted or what would make me happy. I'm your father. I know what's best. No, I interrupted, my voice firm but controlled. You knew what worked for you, what fit your vision of success. But I'm not you, Dad. I never was. And forcing me to become a carbon copy of you wasn't love. It was ego. My mother made a small sound of distress from the doorway, but I continued. Years of hurt pouring out. Do you know what it did to me when you said I'd never amount to anything? When you discarded me like I was nothing because I chose a different path? Do you have any idea how hard these last 3 years have been? My father looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I didn't mean that. I was angry. You meant it at the time, I insisted. And even if you regret it now, you still let me struggle alone for 3 years, rather than admit you were wrong. I was wrong, he whispered, the admission clearly painful for him. Is that what you want to hear? I was wrong. The words I'd waited years to hear landed with less impact than I'd imagined. They couldn't erase the nights I'd gone hungry to afford school supplies, the holidays spent with friends' families, the constant fear of failure that had haunted me. It's not about what I want to hear, Dad. It's about you finally recognizing that you hurt me, deeply and unnecessarily. That you broke our family because you couldn't accept that I had dreams different from yours. My father closed his eyes, exhaustion evident on his face. The monitors beside his bed showed his heart rate increasing. Jessica, my mother warned, remember what the doctor said about stress. I took a deep breath, moderating my tone. I didn't come here to argue. I came because you asked for me, and because despite everything, I didn't want to regret not seeing you if... I left the sentence unfinished. If I died, my father completed bluntly. That's what got me thinking, Jessica. Lying here, not knowing if I'd wake up after the procedure, wondering if my last interaction with my only child would be throwing her out of my house. He reached a tentative hand toward mine. I don't want that to be our story. I didn't take his hand, not yet ready for that step. What do you want, Dad? Why did you ask me to come? I want a second chance, he said slowly. I want to know the woman my daughter has become. I want to see if there's anything left to salvage between us. The sincerity in his voice was unexpected. Richard Davis rarely admitted vulnerability or need. A second chance isn't something you're entitled to, I said carefully. It's something you earn, through actions, not just words in a moment of crisis. He nodded slightly. Tell me how. I'm listening. For the first time in my memory, he genuinely seemed to be. I considered my response carefully. First, you need to understand that I'm not coming back to the life you planned for me. I'm a photographer. That's my path, and it's non-negotiable. I understand. Second, our relationship can only rebuild if it's based on respect. Real respect for who I actually am, not who you wish I was. That's fair, he acknowledged, though the admission clearly didn't come easily. And third, I need time. 3 years of silence doesn't get fixed in one hospital visit. Trust has to be rebuilt gradually. My father absorbed my conditions, then asked, and if I agree to these terms, what then? Then we can try. Small steps, no pressure, no expectations of instant family harmony. For a moment, vulnerability showed through my father's typically stoic exterior. I'd like that, Jessica. My mother, who had remained silent during our exchange, stepped forward hesitantly. We both would. I looked between them. My father in his hospital bed, humbled by illness. My mother standing uncertainly nearby, torn between her husband and daughter as she had always been. They were flawed people who had hurt me deeply, but they were still my parents. The connection, damaged as it was, remained. I'll come back tomorrow, I said finally. For a short visit. We can start there. As I left the hospital, emotions swirled within me. Caution, hope, lingering anger, and unexpected relief. The confrontation I had both dreaded and needed had finally happened. I had spoken my truth without compromise, without reverting to the compliance that had characterized my childhood. Whether this marked a genuine turning point or merely a crisis-induced temporary change in my father remained to be seen. But as I drove back to my apartment, I realized something important. I was no longer the frightened, devastated girl who had stood on that porch with garbage bags at her feet. I had found my voice, my strength, and my path. Whatever happened with my parents going forward, I would face it on my terms, not as the daughter desperate for approval, but as a woman secure in her own worth. The tentative reconciliation with my parents progressed in small, cautious steps over the following months. Short hospital visits evolved into occasional coffee meetings after my father's discharge. Our conversations remained superficial at first, careful, small talk that avoided deeper issues, but gradually established a fragile new connection. My father's brush with mortality had genuinely shaken him. The imperious attorney who had ruled our household with unwavering certainty seemed diminished, not just physically but in spirit. He retired from Davis and Associates earlier than planned, citing health concerns, but perhaps also acknowledging a shift in priorities. "The firm will survive without me," he remarked during one of our coffee meetings, attempting humor that couldn't quite mask his discomfort at discussing his reduced role. 30 years of 60-hour weeks was enough. I nodded, uncertain how to respond to this new version of my father, one who acknowledged limitations and expressed regrets. It was like learning to interact with a stranger who wore a familiar face. My mother seemed to blossom slightly in my father's subdued presence, offering opinions more freely and occasionally referencing my photography without the hesitation that had previously accompanied any mention of my career choice. During a lunch in early spring, she tentatively asked if she could see some of my recent work. "I've been following your Instagram," she admitted, looking almost embarrassed by the confession. "But I'd love to see your prints in person sometime." The request surprised me. "You've been following my Instagram? Since when?" "Since about a month after you left," she said quietly. "I created an account just for that purpose. Your father didn't know." This small act of rebellion, this secret attempt to remain connected to my life, touched me unexpectedly. "I have a showcase coming up at Hillcrest next month, student portfolios. You could come if you want." Her face brightened. "I'd like that very much." The showcase became a milestone in our fragile rebuilding. Both my parents attended, my father looking uncomfortably out of place among the artistic crowd in his pressed shirt and slacks. My mother nervous but clearly proud as she studied my displayed photographs. My thesis project, titled Displaced, explored themes of home, belonging, and resilience through portraits of people who had experienced various forms of displacement: refugees, foster youth, disaster survivors, and others forced to rebuild their lives. The parallels to my own experience were obvious, but transformed into something universal rather than merely personal. Professor Harlow introduced me to several gallery owners and working photographers who attended the showcase. "Ms. Davis shows remarkable maturity in her work," she told them, her earlier criticism replaced by genuine admiration. "Her technical skill is matched by emotional depth that's rare in photographers twice her age." I caught my father watching. This interaction from across the room, his expression unreadable. Later, as we stood before my featured series, he cleared his throat awkwardly. "These are powerful," he said, studying a portrait of an elderly woman standing amid the ruins of her hurricane-damaged home. "You've captured something in her eyes. Determination, despite everything." "That's Edie," I explained. "She lost everything in Hurricane Laura, but refused to leave her property. She's rebuilding at 74. My father nodded slowly. "And this series, it's about people like her? People who lost their homes?" "It's about people who had to redefine home," I clarified, "who had to find strength when their foundations were shaken." He met my gaze then, understanding passing between us. "Like you did." "Like I did," I confirmed softly. It wasn't an explicit apology, but it was an acknowledgement. Perhaps the most direct we had come to addressing the underlying trauma that still influenced our relationship. As graduation approached, my professional life gained momentum. Elaine offered me a permanent position as her associate photographer, with the potential for partnership after a few years. Several of my showcase pieces were selected for exhibition, in a downtown gallery known for launching emerging artists. My future, which had once seemed so precarious, was taking promising shape. Then came the phone call that would force me to make a pivotal choice about the direction of my life and the nature of forgiveness. "Jessica?" My father's voice sounded strained, reminiscent of the hospital call months earlier. "Do you have a moment to talk? Is everything okay? Your heart?" "My health is fine," he assured me quickly. "But I need to discuss something important with you. Could you come to the house this evening?" The house. My childhood home that I hadn't entered since graduation night. The invitation itself was significant, a crossing of boundaries that had remained firm despite our cautious reconciliation. "What's this about?" I asked, wariness creeping into my voice. He sighed heavily. "It's complicated. I'd rather explain in person." "Please, Jessica. It's important." Curiosity overrode caution. "All right. I'll be there at 7. Driving down the familiar tree-lined street toward my parents' home that evening felt surreal. The manicured lawns and stately houses of my neighborhood remained unchanged, a stark contrast to how much I had transformed since leaving. I parked in the driveway, taking a moment to steady myself before approaching the front door, the same door that had slammed behind me 3 years earlier. My mother answered immediately, as if she'd been waiting. "Jessica, thank you for coming." She embraced me briefly, still slightly awkward, but warmer than in previous encounters. "Your father's in his study." The house smelled the same: lemon, polish, and the faint scent of my mother's preferred flowers. Family photographs lined the hallway, including several that featured me in younger, more compliant days. I noticed with surprise that my high school graduation photo had been added to the collection, a peace offering of sorts. My father stood as I entered his study, gesturing toward the leather chair opposite his desk. The formal setting immediately put me on guard. This was where he had always conducted serious family discussions, maintaining the same authoritative position he used with legal clients. "Thank you for coming," he began, settling back into his chair. "What I need to discuss affects you directly, so I wanted to speak in person." My mother slipped into the room, taking a seat on the small sofa against the wall, present but peripheral, her usual position in family matters. "I'm listening," I said, keeping my tone neutral. My father folded his hands on the desk. "As you know, I retired from the firm earlier this year. What you don't know is that I've been reconsidering many aspects of my life since the heart attack, including my professional legacy." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "Davis and Associates has been in our family for 3 generations. Your grandfather built it from nothing, and I expanded it significantly. I always assumed it would continue through you." I tensed, immediately defensive. "Dad, if this is about trying to convince me to go to law school again—" "It's not," he interrupted, raising a hand. "Please, hear me out." Reluctantly, I nodded. "The firm needs new leadership. My retirement left a gap that none of the current partners quite fills. They're excellent attorneys, but lack the vision to take Davis and Associates into the future." He took a deep breath. "I've been approached with an offer to merge with Weston and Keller, a larger firm with a national presence." The name was familiar, a prestigious firm known for corporate law. "And you're considering it?" "More than considering. The paperwork is nearly finalized." He leaned forward slightly. "But there's a complication. The family name, the Davis legacy, would be absorbed and eventually disappear in the merger." I waited, unsure where this was leading or what it had to do with me. "There is an alternative," he continued. "The firm could remain independent if there was a Davis to lead it, not necessarily as managing partner immediately, but on a clear path to leadership." Understanding dawned. "You want me to join the firm?" "I want to offer you the opportunity," he corrected carefully. "You would need law school, of course, but with your undergraduate degree nearly complete, you could start next fall. I've spoken with the dean at Westridge. Despite the unusual circumstances, your academic record is strong enough that they would consider your application favorably." The audacity of his proposal left me momentarily speechless. After everything that had happened, he was still pursuing the same plan he'd had for me years ago. The very plan that had led to our estrangement. "You can't be serious," I finally managed. "After everything that happened? After I've spent 3 years building a completely different career?" "I understand this comes as a surprise," he acknowledged, "but circumstances have changed. The firm's future is uncertain without a Davis at the helm, and you've proven yourself capable of far more than I gave you credit for." "By succeeding in photography, the field you dismissed," I pointed out, anger rising. "The field you threw me out of your house for pursuing." My father had the grace to look discomfited. "I made mistakes, Jessica. Serious ones. I recognize that now." "Do you? Because asking me to abandon the career I've built to fulfill your Original plan doesn't suggest much has changed. It's not about my plan anymore, he insisted. It's about opportunity, a significant one. Davis & Associates represents a substantial legacy, both professionally and financially. As my daughter, that legacy should rightfully include you. My mother spoke up for the first time. What your father is trying to say, Jessica, is that we want to make amends, to give you what should have been yours all along. I looked between them, understanding dawning. This isn't just about the firm, is it? This is your way of bringing me back into the fold, of making things right, according to your definition. My father shifted uncomfortably. Is it so wrong to want to provide for your future? To offer you stability and prominence in a respected profession? It's wrong to ignore who I actually am and what I actually want, I replied steadily. I'm not a lawyer, Dad. I've never wanted to be one. I'm a photographer, a good one, with a promising career already in motion. Photography is a difficult field, he countered. Competitive, unstable. Law offers security, prestige. I don't need your version of security, I interrupted. I've been supporting myself for 3 years. I have a job offer from one of the most respected photographers in the state. My work is being exhibited in galleries. I'm building the life I want. At least consider it, my father urged. Take some time to think about what this opportunity truly represents. I stood, unable to remain in the suffocating formality of his study any longer. I don't need time. My answer is no. The familiar flash of disappointment crossed his face, the expression I'd spent my childhood dreading and my adult life learning to withstand. Jessica, you're being hasty. This decision affects not just your future, but generations of Davis legacy. A legacy you excluded me from the moment I chose my own path, I reminded him. You can't disown me when I displease you, then try to reclaim me when it suits your purposes. My mother rose, distress evident. Jessica, please. Your father is trying to make things right. By attempting to erase the last 3 years? By pretending my career choice was just a phase? I shook my head. That's not making things right. That's trying to rewrite history to fit a narrative where he didn't make devastating mistakes. My father's jaw tightened, the first glimpse of his former authoritative self since his illness. You're being unnecessarily dramatic. I'm offering you a substantial opportunity that most would gratefully accept. I'm not most people. I'm your daughter, the one you said would never amount to anything because I chose art over law. The old hurt resurged, sharper for having been temporarily buried beneath cautious reconciliation. Was that conditional? Did you only mean I wouldn't amount to anything as a photographer? Or did you mean I was worthless unless I followed your approved path? I told you I regret those words, he said stiffly. Regret isn't the same as understanding why they were wrong, I countered. And this offer proves you still don't understand. I turned to leave, then paused at the door. I've spent 3 years proving I could succeed without your name, your money, or your approval. I'm not abandoning that journey now because you've decided I'm worthy of the Davis legacy after all. The drive home passed in a blur of emotions. Anger at my father's persistent inability to accept my choices. Disappointment that our fragile reconciliation had been built on such shaky foundations. And beneath it all, a deeper recognition that I stood at a crossroads. I could return to the fold, accept the path of least resistance, reclaim my place in the family and the privileges that came with it. Or I could continue on my hard-won independent journey, maintaining integrity to my own vision despite the more difficult road ahead. Back in my apartment, I paced restlessly, too agitated to settle. My phone buzzed repeatedly, messages from both parents that I ignored. Eventually, I called the one person whose perspective I knew would be untainted by family dynamics. He offered you what? Elaine exclaimed when I explained the situation. After everything you've accomplished? He sees it as giving me back what I lost, I explained, sinking onto my sofa. Making amends by offering me the family legacy. That's not making amends, Elaine said flatly. That's trying to erase your independence and bring you back under control. Her bluntness was refreshing after the convoluted emotional tangle of the evening. Part of me wonders if I'm being stubborn by refusing, I admitted. The practical benefits are substantial: financial security, professional status. At the cost of your authentic self, Elaine pointed out. Jessica, I've watched you develop into a uniquely talented photographer with a perspective that can't be taught. That didn't happen despite your struggles. It happened because of them. Your work has depth precisely because you've had to fight for every step forward. Her words resonated with something Professor Harlow had said during my portfolio review. There's a hard-won clarity in your compositions that speaks of personal reckoning. Don't lose that authenticity. It's your greatest strength. This isn't just about career choice, is it? I said slowly. It's about whether I'm willing to be defined by his terms again. Exactly. And about whether you trust yourself enough to continue on your own path. After we hung up, I sat in contemplative silence, considering the pivotal nature of this decision. It wasn't just about law versus photography anymore. It was about the fundamental direction of my life, and whether reconciliation with my parents required compromising my hard-won identity. Around midnight, I finally responded to my mother's texts. I need time to think. Please don't contact me for a few days. The next morning, I requested a meeting with Professor Harlow, seeking guidance from someone whose artistic judgment I trusted implicitly. We met in her office, surrounded by her acclaimed photography books and exhibition catalogs. You already know what you need to do, she said after listening to my dilemma. You're just seeking permission to trust your instincts. Am I making a mistake by turning down security for passion? She smiled slightly. That framing reveals your father's influence still at work in your thinking. Security versus passion is a false dichotomy. Many successful photographers lead stable, financially sound lives doing work they love. But the odds are actually in your favor, she interrupted. Your technical skills are exceptional. Your artistic voice is distinctive and evolving. You've already secured professional connections most students only dream of. And most importantly, you've demonstrated remarkable resilience and work ethic. She leaned forward, emphasizing her next words. Jessica, in 3 years, you've built more momentum in photography than many create in a decade. Abandoning that trajectory now would be the true risk. Later that day, I met with Elaine to discuss the associate photographer position she had offered. What had been a tentative conversation about future possibilities became a concrete negotiation of terms, salary, and growth potential. By the end of our meeting, I had a formal offer letter and a clear professional pathway that had nothing to do with the Davis name or legacy. That evening, I stood at my apartment window, watching the sunset bathe the city in golden light, the kind of lighting photographers dream of capturing. The moment felt symbolic. Illumination after confusion, clarity emerging from shadow. I had my answer. I knew what I needed to do. The following day, I returned to my parents' house, resolved and centered in a way I hadn't been during our previous encounter. My father received me in the sunroom rather than his study, a less formal setting that I appreciated as a small concession. I've made my decision, I said simply, declining his offer of refreshment. I'm continuing with photography. I've accepted a full-time position with Elaine Cortez Photography that begins after graduation. He exhaled slowly, disappointment evident, but controlled. I see. I hope you do, I continued. This isn't about rejecting you or the Davis legacy. It's about honoring the path I've created for myself, the one that aligns with my talents and passions. And if that path proves more difficult than you anticipate, then I'll face those difficulties, I said firmly. Just as I've faced every challenge since the night you asked me to leave this house. My mother entered quietly, taking a seat beside my father. Her expression suggested she already knew what my answer would be. I want a relationship with both of you, I continued. But it has to be based on who I actually am, not who you wish I was. I can't be the daughter who follows your predetermined script, Dad. I need to write my own story. My father was silent for a long moment, absorbing my words. When he finally spoke, his voice held resignation rather than anger. I had hoped, but I understand. Your mind is made up. It is. And the firm, Davis and Associates? That's your legacy, not mine, I said gently. Whatever decision you make about its future should be based on what's best for the firm, not on hopes that I might somehow save the family name. He nodded slowly. You've become quite definitive in your positions. I've had to be, I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. We talked for another hour, the most honest conversation we'd had since my departure 3 years earlier. There were no dramatic breakthroughs or tearful reconciliations, but there was a new foundation being laid, one based on reality rather than wishful thinking from either side. As I prepared to leave, my father walked me to the door, a courtesy he hadn't extended on my previous visit. Your exhibition, he said unexpectedly. The portraits of displaced people. What about them? They showed remarkable empathy and technical skill I hadn't fully appreciated. He hesitated. I would like to understand your work better, to see what you see through that camera of yours. It wasn't acceptance, not completely, but it was an opening, a willingness to try understanding the path I had chosen rather than simply dismissing it. I have another exhibition next month, I offered. The Downtown Gallery. I could send you the details. Please do. Walking to my car, I felt lighter than I had in years. I hadn't compromised my hard-won independence or authenticity. I hadn't surrendered to the easier path of falling back into family patterns. Instead, I had stood firmly in my truth and offered connection on new, healthier terms. The pivotal decision hadn't really been about career paths. It had been about defining myself on my own terms while still allowing for the possibility of family reconciliation. It had been about recognizing that true amends couldn't come through erasing the past, but only through acknowledging it and building something new from its lessons. As I drove away from my childhood home, I realized I was no longer looking in the rearview mirror. My focus had shifted firmly to the road ahead, a road I had chosen, a journey I had earned the right to continue. My graduation from Hillcrest Arts Institute marked the official transition from student to professional. The ceremony itself was small and intimate, typical of specialized arts programs. Elaine attended, along with Zoe, Uncle Robert, and several of my supportive extended family members. My parents sat somewhat awkwardly in the row behind them, still separate from the network of support I'd built in their absence, but present, nonetheless. After the ceremony, my mother embraced me with genuine pride. Your father and I have something for you, she said, handing me an envelope. I opened it cautiously, half expecting another attempt to lure me toward law school. Inside was a check, a substantial one. What is this? I asked, immediately wary. Consider it delayed support, my father explained. Money that would have gone toward your education if circumstances had been different. The sum was generous, enough to clear my student loans and provide a cushion as I started my professional career. Part of me wanted to refuse it, to maintain the complete independence I'd worked so hard to establish. But another part recognized that accepting financial help now, on my terms, after succeeding without it, was different from being dependent on their approval. Thank you, I said finally. This will help with my student loans. That was the intention, my father replied, seeming relieved at my acceptance. A fresh start without debt hanging over you. It was a peace offering, an acknowledgement of their absence during my college years. I accepted it as such, careful to maintain boundaries while allowing for this gesture of support. The summer following graduation passed in a whirlwind of activity. I began my full-time position at Elaine's studio, moved into a slightly larger apartment, and saw my Displaced series featured in not one, but 2 gallery exhibitions. Life was unfolding exactly as I had planned since taking control of my own path. Then came the first signs of resistance to the narrative I'd been carefully constructing. It began innocuously enough, a call from my mother suggesting lunch at an upscale restaurant downtown. "Your father's business associate will be joining us," she mentioned casually. "Harrison Weston from Weston and Keller. He's very interested in meeting you." "Mom," I said carefully, "if this is another attempt to draw me into the legal world—" "Not at all," she assured me quickly. "Harrison is an avid art collector. I mentioned your upcoming exhibition and he expressed genuine interest." Skeptical but willing to give her the benefit of the doubt, I agreed to the lunch. Harrison Weston proved to be a charming man in his 60s, with an impressive knowledge of contemporary photography. He asked thoughtful questions about my work, mentioned several photographers whose style influenced my own, and seemed genuinely interested in my career. "Your mother tells me you have an exhibition opening next week," he said over dessert. "I'd be very interested in attending." "Of course," I replied, pleasantly surprised by his authentic engagement. "I can send you the details." "Excellent." He smiled warmly. "And perhaps afterward we might discuss a commission. My firm is renovating our executive floor and we're looking for original artwork that speaks to our community involvement." My interest was piqued. A corporate commission could be significant exposure and income. I'd be happy to discuss that. After lunch, walking back to the studio with my mother, I felt cautiously optimistic. That went better than I expected. "Harrison is a good man," she said. "He and your father go way back." "And he's really interested in photography? This wasn't just a setup?" My mother looked genuinely hurt. "Jessica, I wouldn't manipulate." "You like that?" "Harrison legitimately appreciates art. The fact that he's also your father's colleague is incidental." I wanted to believe her, but years of navigating my father's indirect approaches had made me wary. "And Dad? How does he feel about his merger partner potentially commissioning work from his photographer daughter?" "Actually, the merger talks have cooled," she said, surprising me. "Your father is reconsidering his options for the firm's future." The exhibition opening the following week drew an impressive crowd, including Harrison Weston with several colleagues. True to his word, he expressed interest in commissioning a series for their firm's renovation. We arranged to meet the following week to discuss details. Uncle Robert, who attended the opening with his new girlfriend, pulled me aside with a note of caution. "Be careful with Weston, Jess. He's not just your father's business associate. He's his closest advisor right now." Mom said the merger was off. Not off, paused, and Harrison is right in the middle of those negotiations. He squeezed my shoulder gently. "Just make sure any commission is about your work, not about leveraging you in some business strategy." His warning lingered as I prepared for my meeting with Harrison. I arrived at his office determined to maintain professional clarity about any potential commission. Harrison welcomed me warmly, giving me a tour of the executive floor they planned to renovate. "We want something that reflects our commitment to the community," he explained. "Images that show the human impact of our pro bono work, perhaps." The project sounded legitimate and aligned with my documentary style. We discussed budget, timeline, and creative direction, all standard considerations for a professional commission. Then the conversation took an unexpected turn. "Your father speaks very highly of you, Jessica," Harrison mentioned as we returned to his office. "He's quite proud of your accomplishments." "That's relatively new," I acknowledged carefully. Harrison smiled sympathetically. "Richard can be challenging, brilliant legal mind, but sometimes lacking in emotional intelligence." I've known him for 30 years, seen him through many phases. I remained silent, uncertain where this was heading. He values legacy above almost everything, Harrison continued. The Davis name means a great deal to him. I'm aware. That's why this commission is particularly meaningful. A Davis contributing to Weston and Keller's new image, it's symbolically important. And there it was, the angle I'd suspected might exist. So this isn't just about my photography. Harrison waved a dismissive hand. Your work speaks for itself. I wouldn't have suggested this if I didn't genuinely admire your aesthetic. But I won't pretend there aren't additional considerations. Such as demonstrating to your father that his concerns about the Davis legacy can be addressed creatively. That there are ways for you to contribute to the family's professional standing without abandoning your chosen path. The strategy became clear. Harrison was positioning himself as the broker of compromise, someone who could satisfy both my father's desire for legacy continuity and my determination to remain a photographer. Mr. Weston, I said carefully, I appreciate your interest in my work, but I need absolute clarity that any commission would be based on the merit of my photography, not on my last name or its usefulness in merger negotiations. Harrison studied me thoughtfully. You are very much your father's daughter, direct and perceptive. Yes, Jessica, I want to commission your work primarily because it's excellent. The connection to your father is a secondary benefit that happens to align with other business considerations. I left the meeting with mixed feelings. The commission itself was legitimate and valuable, the kind of corporate project that could advance my portfolio and reputation. But the underlying dynamics felt murky, laden with my father's unspoken influence. When I discussed it with Elaine, she was characteristically blunt. Take the commission, do exceptional work, and ignore the family politics. Your photographs will stand on their own merit, regardless of how they came to be commissioned. I followed her advice, accepting the project while maintaining careful professional boundaries. Over the next several weeks, I researched Weston and Keller's pro bono initiatives, photographed their community impact projects, and developed a compelling, visual narrative of their philanthropic work. My father remained surprisingly distant during this process, neither commenting on my collaboration with Harrison nor attempting to insert himself into the project. This restraint was new and somewhat disorienting, evidence perhaps of his effort to respect my professional independence. The commission was nearly complete when the more direct pushback began. My mother called one evening, her voice tense. Your father and I would like you to join us for dinner tomorrow night. Harold and Maria Bennett will be there. The Bennett name triggered immediate wariness. Harold Bennett was the managing partner of Bennett and Associates, the second largest law firm in the city, and Davis and Associates' main competitor. Why would you invite me to dinner with Dad's competitors? I asked suspiciously. Their daughter Victoria is graduating from law school next month. They're looking to commission official portraits and would like to see your work. I sighed, frustration mounting. Mom, I'm a documentary and fine art photographer, not a portrait studio photographer. There are dozens of photographers in the city who specialize in corporate headshots. This would be more artistic, she insisted. Something capturing Victoria's achievement after years of hard work. Harold specifically mentioned your Displaced series as having the emotional depth they're looking for. The situation felt increasingly contrived, too perfect a parallel to my own academic journey, too convenient that my father's business rival suddenly admired my work. What's really going on? I asked directly. This feels like another attempt to pull me into Dad's professional orbit. My mother's hesitation confirmed my suspicion. The Bennetts expressed interest in potential collaboration with your father's firm. Harold was quite impressed with Harrison's commission. So I'm being used as a business development tool, I concluded flatly. A way for Dad to show potential partners that the Davis legacy continues through his photographer daughter. That's not fair, Jessica. Your father is proud of your work. He's simply creating opportunities for you to showcase your talent to influential people. Opportunities I haven't asked for and don't need, I pointed out. I have a thriving career that I've built independently. I don't need to be paraded in front of Dad's business associates. Despite my reservations, I agreed to the dinner, determined to address the situation directly rather than avoiding it. The evening proved exactly as uncomfortable as I'd anticipated. Harold and Maria Bennett were polite, but clearly more interested in discussing potential business arrangements with my father than in my photography. Victoria, their daughter, seemed embarrassed by the transparent networking her parents were attempting. When Harold inevitably brought up the possibility of commissioning portraits, I was direct. Mr. Bennett, my schedule is currently full with existing commitments. However, I'd be happy to recommend several excellent portrait photographers who specialize in the type of images you're describing. My father's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. The familiar look of disappointment I'd grown up dreading, but had learned to withstand. Later that evening, after the Bennetts departed, the tension broke into open conflict. You deliberately sabotaged a valuable connection, my father accused, his composed facade slipping. The Bennetts could have been significant clients for you. I don't need clients who are only interested in me because of my connection to you, I replied evenly. And I don't appreciate being used as a business development strategy without my consent. Is that what you think this is? His voice rose slightly. That I'm using you? What else would you call arranging meetings with business associates under the pretense of interest in my work, when the real agenda is exploring potential firm collaborations? My mother attempted to intervene. Jessica, your father is simply trying to help your career. My career is doing fine without this kind of help, I insisted. I've worked extremely hard to be recognized for my work, not for my family name. These arrangements undermine that effort. My father paced the living room, frustration evident. You're being unnecessarily difficult. There's nothing wrong with leveraging family connections in business. It's how the world works. It may be how your world works, I countered, but it's not how I've built my career, and it's not how I want to continue building it. So you'd rather struggle unnecessarily than accept advantages that come with the Davis name? His tone was incredulous. I'd rather succeed authentically than wonder if every opportunity came because of my last name rather than my talent. I stood firm, meeting his gaze directly. And I'm not struggling, Dad. I'm thriving precisely because I've established my reputation independently. The argument continued in circles, neither of us willing to concede. My father couldn't comprehend my rejection of networking opportunities that seemed obviously beneficial to him. I couldn't accept his inability to respect my professional boundaries. Eventually, exhausted by the cyclical argument, I gathered my things to leave. I appreciate that you believe you're helping, I said, moderating my tone. But I need you to respect that I want to build my career my way, not as an extension of the Davis legal legacy. Pride, my father muttered. Stubborn, unnecessary. Pride. Independence, I corrected. Hard-won independence that I'm not willing to compromise. In the weeks that followed, similar tensions surfaced repeatedly. My father, unable to directly control my career path as he had once attempted, sought indirect influences, arranging introductions to potential clients, suggesting my name for projects related to his professional circle, even purchasing one of my prints for display in the Davis & Associates lobby. Each gesture existed in an uncomfortable space between genuine support and subtle manipulation, ways of inserting himself into my professional narrative without overtly challenging my autonomy. Each required careful navigation to maintain boundaries, without rejecting his attempts at reconciliation. The situation came to a head when I discovered my biography in the program for an upcoming charity gala prominently mentioned my connection to the Davis family of Davis & Associates. I had been invited to display several pieces in the event's silent auction, a professional opportunity I'd earned through my gallery connections, not family influence. I immediately called the event coordinator. "There's been a mistake in my bio," I explained. "I need the reference to Davis and Associates removed before the programs are printed." "Oh," she sounded confused. "Your father specifically requested that addition when he increased his donation level. He said it was important to recognize the family connection." Anger flared hot and immediate. Without my knowledge or consent, my father had interfered in my professional presentation, reimposing a connection I had deliberately omitted from my professional identity. I called him immediately, not bothering to mask my frustration. "You had no right to alter my professional biography. I simply ensured that important context was included," he defended. "The Davis name carries weight in this community. It opens doors. Doors I've been opening perfectly well on my own," I snapped. "This isn't about adding important context. It's about reestablishing control over my narrative." "That's absurd. I was helping raise your profile." "My profile doesn't need raising through your connections. I've built my reputation independently, and I intend to maintain it that way." "Jessica," his voice took on the patronizing tone I particularly resented, "you're overreacting to a simple matter of family pride." "No, I'm establishing a boundary that you continue to violate. My professional identity is mine to define, not yours to edit, according to your preferences." I hung up more abruptly than I intended, immediately regretting the escalation, but not the underlying message. Within minutes, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Your father was trying to help. Please try to understand his perspective." Her message crystallized a pattern I'd been trying to ignore. Despite our cautious reconciliation, my mother continued defaulting to her role as my father's mediator and defender, rather than recognizing my legitimate grievances. I responded, with careful directness, "My perspective matters too. Dad altered my professional presentation without my knowledge or consent. That's not help. It's interference." The charity gala episode created another period of strained relations. My father, offended by what he perceived as ingratitude, withdrew into formal politeness during our infrequent interactions. My mother continued attempting to mediate, trapped in her familiar role between husband and daughter. The pushback wasn't limited to my father. As word of our renewed but tense relationship circulated through family and social circles, I began encountering subtle but persistent pressure from unexpected sources. My Aunt Patricia, once supportive of my independence, began casually mentioning how meaningful it was to my father that I'd returned to the family fold. My cousin Derek suggested I consider photographing the Davis and Associates partners for the firm's website redesign, a chance to blend your career with family tradition. Even Zoe, my most steadfast supporter, questioned whether I was being unnecessarily rigid. "Would it really compromise your integrity to acknowledge your family connection occasionally?" she asked during one of our coffee meetups. "It seems like your dad is genuinely trying in his own way." "His way is the problem," I tried to explain. "Every opportunity he creates comes with strings attached, expectations that I'll gradually reintegrate into his vision for the Davis legacy." "But you've established yourself independently already," she pointed out. "Is there really any harm in accepting some family support now that you've proven yourself?" Her question hit at the core of my internal struggle. Had I reached a point where I could safely accept certain types of family connection without risking the autonomy I'd fought so hard to establish? Or would each concession lead to further erosion of the boundaries I'd carefully constructed? The tension between independence and reconciliation became increasingly difficult to navigate. I wanted a relationship with my parents, one based on mutual respect rather than conditional approval. But each attempt at closeness seemed to trigger my father's ingrained need to direct and shape my life, while my own defensive responses sometimes veered into rigid rejection of any guidance or support. Seeking clarity, I scheduled a session with Dr. Levine, a therapist I'd briefly consulted during my second year of college when the stress of financial independence had become overwhelming. "It sounds like you're facing the complex challenge of redefining a relationship while protecting your hard-won sense of self," she observed after I explained the situation. "Your father is attempting reconciliation in the only way he knows how, through professional connection and influence. You're resisting in the way that feels safest, through firm boundaries and independence. So we're both stuck in our patterns," I concluded. "Patterns that served essential purposes at different points," she clarified. "Your father's need for control and legacy continuity provided structure and purpose throughout his career. Your need for independence was crucial to your survival and growth after being cut off. The question now is whether those same patterns still serve either of you in your current reality." Her perspective shifted something in my understanding. My resistance wasn't just about maintaining professional independence. It was about the deeper fear that any compromise would lead back to the painful dynamics of my childhood and adolescence. "How do I move forward without surrendering the self I've become?" I asked. "By recognizing that accepting connection doesn't necessarily mean sacrificing autonomy," she suggested. "Healthy relationships exist on a spectrum between complete independence and complete integration. The challenge is finding where on that spectrum you and your parents can meet in a way that respects everyone's needs and boundaries." In the weeks that followed, I reflected deeply on Dr. Levine's insights. I began to recognize that my categorical rejection of any family-related professional connection was partly a protective mechanism, a way of preventing my father from reclaiming influence in an area where I'd established myself without him. Simultaneously, I acknowledged that his attempts to create opportunities, while often misguided and boundary-crossing, contained elements of genuine desire to repair our relationship through the only pathway he truly understood: professional advancement and networking. This realization didn't excuse his behavior or negate my need for boundaries, but it created space for more nuanced navigation of our complex dynamic. Perhaps true independence wasn't about rejecting every connection to my family name, but about choosing which connections served my authentic path and which threatened to derail it. With this perspective, I approached my next interaction with my parents differently. When my mother called to invite me to their annual holiday party, an event I'd avoided since our estrangement, I accepted with clear parameters. "I'll come," I told her, "but I need you and Dad to understand something important. I'm attending as your daughter, not as a professional extension of the Davis legacy. I won't be discussing potential commissions or networking for business connections." "Of course, sweetheart," she agreed readily. "We just want you there as family." The party itself became an unexpected exercise in boundary maintenance. Several of my father's colleagues, aware of my growing reputation in photography, approached with thinly veiled business propositions. Each time, I politely redirected the conversation or excused myself. My father watched these interactions from across the room, his expression unreadable. Later, as guests began departing, he approached me on the terrace where I'd stepped out, for a moment of quiet. "You turned down at least 3 potential commissions tonight," he observed, joining me at the stone railing. I tensed, anticipating criticism. "I wasn't here for business development." To my surprise, he nodded slowly. "I'm beginning to understand that your resistance isn't just youthful rebellion or artistic temperament." "It never was," I said quietly. "No," he acknowledged. "It's about creating a life completely separate from my influence, proving that you can succeed without the advantages I tried to provide." The assessment was surprisingly insightful coming from him. "It's about authenticity," I clarified. "About knowing that whatever success I achieve comes from my own effort and talent, not from the Davis name." He was silent for a long moment, gazing out at the snow-covered garden. "You know," he finally said, "I never had that luxury. The Davis legacy was established before I was born, Every achievement of mine came with the asterisk of family connection. It was a vulnerability I hadn't expected, a glimpse into how my father's own path had been shaped by the same forces he'd tried to impose on me. Maybe that's why I find your insistence on independence so challenging, he continued. You've done what I never could, created a wholly separate identity and success. The conversation didn't miraculously resolve our fundamental differences, but it opened a window into mutual understanding that had previously seemed impossible. For perhaps the first time, my father acknowledged my chosen path not as a rejection of family legacy, but as the creation of something authentically mine. As I drove home that night, I realized that the pushback and resistance I'd encountered weren't simply obstacles to overcome. They were necessary friction in the process of redefining my relationship with my parents. Each boundary I maintained, each difficult conversation we navigated, contributed to a slowly emerging new dynamic, one that might eventually accommodate both my independence and our connection as family. The path forward remained unclear and undoubtedly challenging, but I was no longer the frightened 18-year-old standing on the porch with garbage bags at her feet. Nor was I the defensively independent college student determined to succeed at any cost. I was becoming something more complex, a woman confident enough in her own identity to engage with her family without being defined by them. 5 years after graduation, my career had developed a momentum that surprised even my most optimistic supporters. My partnership with Elaine had evolved from employee-employer to genuine collaboration. Our studio had expanded, taking over the entire top floor of the converted factory building and adding 2 junior photographers to handle growing demand. My personal portfolio had garnered national attention when my series on urban displacement won the Emerging Voices in Photography Award, leading to exhibitions in New York, Chicago, and San Francisco. A major publishing house had approached me about compiling my work into a coffee table book focused on community resilience in the face of gentrification. Professional success brought financial stability I'd once thought impossible in a creative field. I'd moved from my small apartment to a modest but stylish loft in an up-and-coming neighborhood, purchased my first new car, and started contributing to a retirement account, practical achievements that silently refuted my father's predictions about the inevitably struggling artist's life. My relationship with my parents had settled into a cautious detente. We maintained regular contact, monthly dinners, occasional family events, with tacit agreement to avoid the most contentious topics. My father had finally ceased his attempts to integrate me into his professional circle, accepting, if not entirely understanding, my insistence on separate career paths. The uneasy peace was disrupted by an unexpected phone call from Uncle Robert on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. "Have you spoken to your father recently?" he asked without preamble. "Not since last week's dinner." "Why?" His hesitation was palpable even through the phone. "There are rumors circulating about Davis and Associates, financial concerns, possible restructuring. I thought you should know." The news was surprising but not entirely shocking. After abandoning the merger with Weston and Keller, my father had attempted several strategic pivots to maintain the firm's market position against larger competitors. Some had seemed questionable, even to my untrained eye. "How serious is it?" "Serious enough that people are talking," Robert replied carefully. "Richard hasn't confided in me. We're still not exactly close, but my sources in the legal community suggest the firm is over-leveraged and losing key clients." "Should I ask him about it?" "That's your call. Just be prepared for him to dismiss your concerns or change the subject. Your father has never been one to acknowledge vulnerability, especially in business matters." I considered Robert's warning during my drive to Elaine's annual summer garden party that weekend. My father had always presented Davis and Associates as an unshakable institution, as permanent and reliable as the ornate building that housed it downtown. The possibility of financial trouble felt incongruous with everything I knew about him. The party provided no opportunity to explore the issue. My parents arrived late and left early, my father citing work commitments, increasingly his excuse for abbreviated social appearances. My mother seemed tense, her usual social grace strained by something she wouldn't discuss. When I called the following week to suggest lunch, my mother begged off with vague references to scheduling conflicts. My father didn't return my messages at all, his assistant citing back-to-back meetings whenever I tried to reach him at the office. The pattern continued for weeks: canceled plans, unreturned calls, minimal communication beyond perfunctory text messages. Their withdrawal was reminiscent of the early days after our estrangement, but with a different quality. Less angry rejection, more distracted avoidance. Finally, frustrated by the growing distance, I drove to their house unannounced one Sunday evening. The property looked different somehow, the meticulous landscaping slightly overgrown, the exterior lighting reduced. Small signs of neglect that would be imperceptible to anyone who didn't know the home's usual immaculate condition. My mother answered the door with visible surprise. "Jessica, we weren't expecting you." "That's become obvious," I replied, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "You've been avoiding me for weeks. I want to know why." The house's interior confirmed my suspicions, subtle changes that suggested financial constraint. The fresh flowers that had always adorned the entryway were absent. The temperature was warmer than usual, as if the air conditioning had been adjusted to save electricity. My mother led me to the living room, where my father sat reviewing documents. He looked up with a mixture of irritation and resignation at my unexpected appearance. "Jessica, what brings you here unannounced?" "Concern," I answered honestly. "You've both been increasingly distant. Uncle Robert mentioned rumors about the firm. I wanted to check on you." My father's expression hardened at the mention of Robert. "Your uncle should be more careful about spreading gossip." "Is it just gossip?" I pressed. My parents exchanged glances, the silent communication of a long-married couple deciding how much to reveal. "The firm is navigating some challenges," my father finally admitted, his tone carefully measured. "Nothing unusual in today's legal market. Consolidation, client movement, competitive pressures." "And these usual challenges are why you've been canceling plans and avoiding my calls?" my mother intervened. "We didn't want to burden you with temporary business concerns. You have your own career to focus on." The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of trying to involve me in the family business, they were now explicitly excluding me from knowledge of its difficulties. "I'm not a child who needs sheltering from reality," I said firmly. "If something's wrong, I'd rather know than wonder why my parents have suddenly disappeared from my life again." My father set aside his papers with a sigh that revealed more fatigue than I'd ever seen him acknowledge. "Davis and Associates is undergoing significant restructuring. We've had to reduce staffing, consolidate practice areas, and pursue refinancing options." "How bad is it?" "Manageable," he insisted, but the slight hesitation before his answer spoke volumes. "We've weathered market fluctuations before." "This seems like more than a fluctuation if it's affecting your personal lives," I observed, gesturing to the subtle signs of economizing around us. My mother looked uncomfortable. "We've made some temporary lifestyle adjustments, nothing serious." "We're fine, Jessica," my father added with finality. "I appreciate your concern, but this isn't something you need to involve yourself in." The dismissal was familiar, my father's default when feeling vulnerable. Rather than pushing further, I shifted the conversation to neutral topics, noting the relief in both their expressions as we moved away from financial matters. Later, as I was leaving, my mother walked me to the door. "Your father doesn't want you to worry," she said quietly. "He's working very hard to resolve the situation." "And you? How are you handling everything?" Her smile was strained. "I'm supporting him as best I can. It's been Difficult to see him struggle with the firm after all these years of success. Is there anything I can do to help? She squeezed my hand. Just being here means more than you know. Your father would never admit it, but having you back in our lives has been a bright spot during a challenging time. Driving home, I reflected on the reversal of circumstances. My parents, once so certain of their financial stability that they could casually discard a daughter who didn't conform to expectations, were now facing their own economic precarity. The firm that had been the center of our family identity, the legacy my father had valued above my happiness, was in jeopardy. Part of me felt a vindictive satisfaction, a human reaction to seeing someone who'd hurt you facing consequences of their own choices. But that feeling was quickly overshadowed by genuine concern. Whatever our complicated history, these were my parents, and they were struggling. Over the next several months, I maintained steady contact despite their continued attempts to minimize their situation. I invited them to dinner more frequently, choosing modestly priced restaurants and sometimes cooking at my loft instead. I made a point of sharing my professional successes, new clients, exhibition reviews, publishing progress, providing positive distractions from their concerns. My father never directly acknowledged the firm's increasing difficulties, but the signs became impossible to ignore. Davis & Associates reduced its office space by half, consolidating onto 3 floors of the building they had once fully occupied. The annual holiday party, traditionally an extravagant showcase of the firm's prosperity, was replaced by a subdued luncheon. My father, once immaculately attired in custom suits, began recycling his wardrobe more noticeably. Through Uncle Robert's discreet updates and my own observations, I pieced together a clearer picture. My father had over-leveraged the firm in an ambitious expansion attempt after the failed merger talks, precisely when the legal market was contracting. Several major clients had departed during the transition, leaving Davis & Associates with expensive overhead and diminished revenue. The situation was worsening, despite his efforts to correct course. One evening in early spring, about 8 months, after my initial confrontation with my parents, my phone rang with my mother's number. Her voice was shaking when I answered. "Jessica, I hate to ask, but is your guest room still available? The one you mentioned when you gave us the tour of your loft?" My mind raced with implications. Of course it is. What's going on? We've had to make some changes, she said vaguely. Just temporarily. We'll explain when we see you. 2 hours later, my parents arrived at my loft with 4 hastily packed suitcases. My father looked haggard, his usual commanding presence diminished by obvious exhaustion and stress. "Thank you for this," he said stiffly as I showed them to the guest room. "It's only for a few nights while we finalize new arrangements." Only. After they had settled in and my mother had gone to shower, did my father finally offer a partial explanation. We sat at my kitchen island, his hands wrapped around a mug of tea I'd prepared. "The house is being listed for sale tomorrow," he said, staring into the steaming liquid rather than meeting my eyes. "We've secured a small condo near downtown, but it won't be ready for occupancy until next week." The news stunned me despite the warning signs. The colonial house had been in our family for 3 generations, a symbol of the Davis legacy almost as significant as the firm itself. "I'm sorry," I said simply, knowing how inadequate the words were. He nodded once, acknowledging both my sympathy and its limitations. "The market is favorable for sellers. The proceeds will help stabilize our situation." "And the firm?" "Continuing under restructured leadership, I've stepped back to consultant status." The admission clearly pained him. "Harrison Weston will oversee day-to-day operations through the transition period." The magnitude of his professional demotion was enormous, from managing partner of his family's firm to consultant under his former merger prospect's supervision. For a man whose identity had been inextricably linked to his professional status, it was a profound, "What can I do to help?" I asked. My father looked up, surprise momentarily displacing his exhaustion. "You're already doing it," he said quietly, "giving us somewhere to stay when we need it, not asking too many questions." "I want to do more than just not ask questions." He shook his head slightly. "This isn't your burden to carry, Jessica. Your mother and I will manage." "The way you expected me to manage when you threw me out at 18? The words escaped before I could filter them, sharper than I'd intended. My father winced visibly. "I deserve that." "That's not why I said it," I backpedaled, regretting. The impulse. "I just meant that families should support each other through difficulties. I learned that from Uncle Robert, from Zoe's family, from the community that helped me when I needed it most." He was silent for a long moment. "I failed you then," he finally acknowledged, completely and inexcusably. "And now, by some twist of fate or cosmic justice, you have the opportunity to succeed where I failed." The conversation marked a turning point in our relationship. My parents stayed in my guest room not for a few days, but for nearly 3 weeks as complications with their condo purchase emerged. That forced proximity created a new dynamic, one where I was the stable provider, and they were dependent on my hospitality. My father struggled visibly with this role reversal. His ingrained need for control clashed with his position as a guest in his daughter's home. Simple domestic decisions, what to have for dinner, which television program to watch, became exercises, in restraint as he fought his natural tendency to dictate terms. My mother adapted more gracefully, finding ways to contribute without overstepping. She cooked elaborate meals when I worked late, organized my chaotic bookshelves with my permission, and generally tried to add value without imposing her presence. Their extended stay coincided with intensive work on my upcoming book. Often, I would be editing photographs or writing captions late into the evening, spread across my dining table with images and notes surrounding me. My father would sometimes sit silently nearby, watching my process with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. One night, as I deliberated between 2 nearly identical shots of an elderly woman on her porch, he offered an unexpected opinion. "The one on the left," he said quietly. Her eyes connect more directly with the viewer. I glanced up, surprised by both his input and its accuracy. "You're right. That's the better choice." He nodded, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. "I may not understand the artistic world you inhabit, but I've spent a career reading faces, discerning intentions, connecting with juries. Some skills translate across disciplines." That small moment of genuine connection, his acknowledgement of my expertise paired with humble offering of his own, created space for others. Gradually, my father began asking thoughtful questions about my projects, offering observations without judgment, and occasionally sharing relevant experiences from his legal career. When they finally moved into their condo, a modest 2-bedroom unit in a building populated primarily by young professionals, I helped transport their remaining belongings from temporary storage. The contrast between this sleek, impersonal space and the character-filled colonial home they'd lost was stark. "It's only temporary," my mother assured me as we unpacked kitchen essentials, "until we stabilize financially." I nodded, not contradicting her optimism, but noting my father's silence on the matter. He seemed to understand, as I did, that their previous lifestyle was likely gone for good. The Davis and Associates of his generation was fundamentally changing, and with it, the financial foundation that had supported their affluent existence. In the months that followed, I maintained steady contact with my parents, inviting them regularly to my loft for meals, attending small gatherings at their condo, establishing a new normal that acknowledged their changed circumstances without dwelling on them. My father never directly discussed the firm's continuing challenges, but news reached me through professional channels. Additional partner departures, practice areas discontinued, long-term lease obligations renegotiated. The Davis legacy he had fought so hard to preserve was being systematically dismantled by financial necessity. Throughout this period, my own career continued its upward trajectory. The publication of my book generated significant media attention, including a feature in a prominent national photography magazine. Elaine and I finalized our partnership agreement, officially renaming the studio Cortez and Davis Photography and expanding our client base to include major corporate accounts and nonprofit organizations. I was careful never to flaunt these successes around my parents, particularly my father. Yet the irony wasn't lost on any of us. The daughter who would never amount to anything was now thriving professionally, while the Davis legacy my father had prioritized above all else was crumbling. The situation came into sharp focus during a dinner at my loft, celebrating the one-year anniversary of my book's publication. My parents attended along with Uncle Robert, Zoe, Elaine, and several other close friends who had supported my journey. As champagne flowed and conversation turned to upcoming projects, my agent mentioned casually, "The advance for your second book is substantial enough that you might consider investing in property. Interest rates are favorable right now." My father, who had been unusually quiet throughout the evening, looked up with an unreadable expression. Later, as guests were departing, he pulled me aside. "You've done remarkably well," he said, his tone a complex mixture of pride and something harder to identify. "Creating success entirely on your own terms." "Not entirely on my own," I corrected. "I had help. From Uncle Robert, from Elaine, from many people who believed in me." "But not from me," he acknowledged. "Not when it mattered most." The raw honesty of his statement caught me off guard. "No," I agreed softly. "Not then." He nodded slowly. "I was wrong, Jessica. About everything that mattered. About what constitutes success. About what you were capable of achieving. About the value of different paths." The admission, more direct and comprehensive than any he had offered before, hung between us, neither accusation nor absolution but simple truth. "I know," I said. "Does that knowledge help?" Hearing me acknowledge how thoroughly mistaken I was? I considered the question carefully. "It doesn't change the past, but it matters for the present, for whatever relationship we continue building from here." My father gazed around my loft, taking in the evidence of my professional success. Framed exhibition announcements, advance copies of my book in multiple languages, the expensive camera equipment arranged neatly on purpose-built shelving. "The irony isn't lost on me," he said with a sad smile. "That you've achieved everything I wanted for you: financial security, professional respect, a legacy of your own, by defying rather than following my direction." "Different paths can lead to similar destinations," I offered. "And sometimes, the more difficult path is the one that truly belongs to you." He nodded thoughtfully. A wisdom I learned too late, but perhaps not too late to appreciate in others. That conversation marked a significant shift in my relationship with my father. The dynamic was no longer defined primarily by past hurts or ongoing tension about career choices. Instead, a new foundation emerged, one built on mutual respect, between two professionals who had faced adversity and responded with determination, albeit in very different contexts. My sustained determination through years of building my career had proven my father definitively wrong about my potential. But more importantly, it had proven me right about myself, about my capacity to pursue my passion with discipline and purpose to transform creative vision into sustainable success. As I closed the door behind my departing guests that evening, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The frightened 18-year-old with garbage bags on the porch had become a woman whose work was recognized nationally, whose financial stability exceeded expectations, whose artistic vision had found its audience. That transformation hadn't happened overnight or without setbacks. It had required sustained determination through countless challenges. Financial struggles, creative blocks, market fluctuations, emotional hurdles. Each obstacle had tested my resolve. Each success had validated my choice. Each step forward had further distanced me from that devastating night when my father's words had threatened to define my future. "You'll never amount to anything." Those words, once so painful, now felt almost irrelevant. Not because they had been explicitly retracted, but because I had so thoroughly disproven them through consistent, determined action over years of independent growth. And in an unexpected twist of circumstance, that same sustained determination had positioned me to offer support when my parents faced their own reversal of fortune, not with resentful triumph, but with the hard-won empathy of someone who had experienced profound uncertainty and emerged stronger. The path forward remained complex. My father's reduced circumstances had humbled, but not fundamentally changed him. Our reconciliation was genuine, but incomplete, marked by progress rather than perfection. Yet with each passing month, our interactions became more authentic, less burdened by unresolved past grievances, more focused on building whatever remained possible between us. What neither of us could have anticipated was how dramatically circumstances would continue evolving, or how my sustained determination would soon face its most significant test in deciding the fate of the very house from which I had once been. Expelled. Almost exactly 10 years after being thrown out of my childhood home, I stood on the sidewalk staring at a for sale sign planted in the front lawn of that same colonial house. The property had changed hands twice since my parents had been forced to sell it. First purchased by a real estate investor who had made cosmetic upgrades, then by a corporate executive who had been transferred unexpectedly before making significant changes. Now it was on the market again, this time with an ominous addition to the sign: foreclosure. I had discovered the listing purely by chance. While researching locations for an upcoming photo series on changing neighborhood demographics, I had stumbled across the property on a real estate website. The coincidence felt almost too perfect to be real, as if the universe had orchestrated an opportunity too symbolic to ignore. My first instinct was to call Zoe, who had remained my closest confidant through every phase of my journey. "You're not seriously considering buying it, are you?" she asked after I explained the situation. "I don't know," I admitted. "It's financially feasible now. The foreclosure price is well within my budget with the advance from my second book and the studio's profits. But emotionally, Jess, that house represents the worst night of your life. It also represents everything that came before," I pointed out. "My entire childhood. Not all of it was bad." "And what about your parents? How would they feel about you owning their former home?" That question had been circling in my mind since discovering the listing. My relationship with my parents had stabilized into something cautiously positive. We had dinner together monthly, celebrated holidays as a family, and maintained regular contact. The worst wounds had scarred over, though sensitive spots remained. But how would they react to this specific development? Would my father see it as a deliberate reminder of his failure? Would my mother find it painful to imagine me living in spaces she had once maintained? I decided to consult Uncle Robert before making any decisions. His perspective had guided me at every critical juncture, since my departure from that house a decade earlier. "It's poetic justice in a way," he observed thoughtfully when I showed him the listing. "The house that was once denied to you becoming yours through your own success." "That's what I'm afraid of," I admitted. "That purchasing it would seem like I'm rubbing their reversal of fortune in their faces." "Or," Robert suggested, "it could be seen as preserving a piece of family history that would otherwise be lost to strangers." His reframing gave me pause. The colonial had been in our family for 3 generations before financial necessity had forced its sale. Despite everything that had happened there, including my expulsion, it remained part of the Davis legacy. I need to talk to them, I decided, directly and honestly. The conversation wasn't easy to initiate. I invited my parents to dinner at my loft, preparing my mother's favorite meal to soften what might be a difficult discussion. After dessert, As we lingered over coffee, I finally broached the subject. "I've come across something unexpected," I began carefully. "The Colonial is on the market again, as a foreclosure." My mother's eyes widened. "Already? The Hendersons just purchased it last year. Apparently, he lost his position at Camden Industries. They're facing financial difficulties." My father's expression remained carefully neutral. "Real estate can be volatile in this market." "I'm considering purchasing it," I said simply, watching their reactions closely. Surprise registered on both their faces, followed by a series of more complex emotions: confusion, wariness, perhaps a hint of pain. "May I ask why?" my father inquired, his tone deliberately measured. I had prepared my answer, considering it carefully from multiple angles. "Several reasons. It's an excellent investment at the foreclosure price. The neighborhood has maintained its value despite market fluctuations. And—" I hesitated before adding the most important factor. "It was our family home for generations. It seems wrong to let it pass completely out of the family if there's an alternative." My mother reached for my hand across the table, her eyes glistening. "You would do that? After everything that happened there?" "The house itself wasn't at fault for the human dramas it contained," I said gently. "And not all my memories there are painful." My father had been uncharacteristically silent, his gaze fixed on his coffee cup. When he finally spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. "There's a certain symmetry to it," he observed. "You returning to that house under circumstances nobody could have predicted a decade ago." The ambiguity of his statement left me uncertain of his actual feelings. "If it would be too difficult for either of you, I won't pursue it," I assured them. "Your emotional well-being matters more to me than any property." My father finally met my eyes directly. "Jessica, you don't need our permission or approval. That's been the lesson of these past 10 years, hasn't it? That you determine your own path, regardless of our opinions." "Yes," I acknowledged. "But that doesn't mean I'm indifferent to how my choices affect you. We've worked too hard to rebuild our relationship. I won't jeopardize that for a house, no matter its symbolic value." My mother squeezed my hand. "It's thoughtful of you to consider us, sweetheart. But your father is right. This decision should be yours alone." "Not entirely alone," my father amended unexpectedly. "If you do purchase it, I have something that should return to the house." He reached for his wallet, removing a small key. The key to the library cabinet that contains the family documents, birth certificates, photographs, historical records dating back to your great-grandfather. When we sold the house, I couldn't bear to leave those behind. He placed the key on the table between us, a symbol of continuity, of heritage passed forward rather than denied. The gesture contained an implicit blessing more meaningful than explicit permission could have been. 2 weeks later, after inspection, financing approval, and negotiations with the bank, I signed the closing documents that transferred ownership of the Colonial House to my name. The symmetry my father had noted felt even more profound as I stood on the porch with the new keys, now not as a discarded daughter with garbage bags, but as the rightful owner of a property my own success had enabled me to purchase. Walking through the empty rooms, familiar in structure but stripped of the furnishings I remembered, evoked a strange mixture of emotions. In the entryway where the family portrait had crashed to the floor a decade earlier, I placed my first new acquisition, a black and white photograph I had taken of my parents at my book launch, their faces reflecting pride and a touch of wonder as they examined the publication. The kitchen where I had prepared countless meals alongside my mother would need significant updating. The last owners had made only cosmetic changes to its dated features. The formal dining room where my father had lectured me about responsibility and tradition would become my home office, filled with photography books and editing equipment. And the bedroom that had been mine throughout childhood and adolescence? I hadn't yet decided how to repurpose that space, perhaps as a guest room, perhaps as something else entirely. The decision could wait until the more essential renovations were complete. The irony of my situation wasn't lost on me. 10 years earlier, I had been forcibly expelled from this house for choosing a path my father deemed unworthy. Now I was returning as the sole owner, my impractical career choice having provided the financial means to reclaim a property my father's practical legal career had ultimately been unable to maintain. Yet as I walked from room to room, planning, renovations, and envisioning a new future for the house, I found myself focusing less on the ironic reversal and more on the continuity of family history. This structure had sheltered generations of Davis family members, some more compassionate than others, some wiser than others, all flawed and human in their own ways. I called my parents from the empty living room, the sound echoing slightly, in the unfurnished space. "I'd like you both to be involved in the renovation decisions," I told them. "This house holds your memories too, and I want to honor what matters to you, even as I make it my own." The offer visibly moved my mother, who had worried about losing her last connection to the home she had lovingly maintained for decades. My father's reaction was more restrained but no less significant, a nod of acknowledgement that suggested recognition of both what had been lost and what might yet be preserved. 3 days after closing, I invited them to tour the property, soliciting their input on which original features should be maintained and which could be modernized. As we walked through the rooms together, the dynamic between us continued its gradual transformation, not erasing the past, but building something new atop its complicated foundation. In the backyard, standing beneath the oak tree that had shaded family gatherings for generations, my father made an observation that captured the essence of our journey. "There's a lesson here," he said quietly, "about the difference between houses and homes. When I thought this house defined us, defined me as successful, defined our family as established, I was willing to sacrifice actual family connections to maintain it. Now that it's gone and returned in a completely different way, I understand what should have been obvious all along." "What's that?" I asked. "That buildings are replaceable. Legal careers are replaceable. Even fortunes can be lost and rebuilt. But family relationships, once damaged, require extraordinary effort to repair, and some never fully heal." He gazed up at the second-floor windows, where my childhood bedroom overlooked the yard. "I'm fortunate that despite my worst mistakes, you found your way back to us, differently than I imagined, more successfully than I predicted, but undeniably and authentically yourself." As renovations began, transforming the colonial's traditional interiors into spaces that reflected my contemporary aesthetic while preserving key historical elements, the property became a physical manifestation of reconciliation. Not perfect or complete, but genuine and evolving. The formal parlor where my father had once hosted colleagues became a gallery space showcasing both my work and pieces by emerging artists I admired. The kitchen was expanded and modernized, designed for entertaining in a more relaxed style than my parents had preferred. The library, however, remained largely unchanged, its built-in shelving now housing my photography books alongside the family documents my father had preserved. 6 months after purchase, renovations complete enough for comfortable occupancy, I hosted a housewarming gathering that symbolically bridged past and present. My parents attended, as did Uncle Robert, Zoe, and her husband, Elaine and her partner, and newer friends from my professional circle. As glasses were raised in the dining room that now featured an exhibition-quality lighting system alongside the original crown molding, I offered a toast that acknowledged the complex journey that had brought us all to that moment. "To second chances," I said simply. "For houses, for relationships, for dreams that survive despite obstacles." My father, standing by the fireplace that had witnessed both painful arguments and meaningful reconciliations, added his own quiet amendment, and to the wisdom to recognize them when they appear. The colonial house, once a symbol of rejection and conditional love, had transformed into something entirely different, a testament to perseverance, to success achieved on one's own terms, and to the possibility of healing even the deepest family wounds. The foreclosure sign that had caught my attention that day had heralded more than a real estate opportunity. It had marked the final resolution of a decade-long journey from devastated teenager to accomplished professional, from rejected daughter to independent woman capable of offering genuine forgiveness without surrendering her hard-won autonomy. As my guests circulated through rooms that blended Davis family history with my distinct artistic vision, the house seemed to settle comfortably into its new identity, no longer primarily a symbol of status or tradition, but a home where authenticity was valued above conformity and where reconciliation coexisted with honest acknowledgement of past harms. The karmic cycle had completed itself in ways none of us could have anticipated on that rainy graduation night when my belongings sat in garbage bags on the porch. The words that had once threatened to define my future, "You'll never amount to anything," had been answered not with reciprocal cruelty, but with demonstrable success and measured grace. In reclaiming the physical space from which I had been expelled, I had also reclaimed the narrative of my own potential, not as defined by my father's limited vision or by reactive defiance of his expectations, but as authored authentically by the woman I had become through both struggle and achievement. Living in the renovated Colonial brought unexpected changes to both my personal and professional life. The generous space allowed me to create a small home studio where I could work on personal projects without traveling to the downtown location. I shared with Elaine. The mature gardens that had once been my mother's pride became the backdrop for intimate portrait sessions with local clients. But the most significant transformation wasn't in the physical space or my work habits. It was in my relationship with myself and my family history. One rainy evening, almost a year after purchasing the house, I found myself in the library examining the family documents my father had preserved. Among the formal records and photographs, I discovered a small leather journal I'd never seen before. The first page bore my grandmother Elizabeth Davis's name and the date 1945. Curled in the window seat that overlooked the back garden, I began reading my grandmother's private thoughts, recorded when she was just 19, about my age when I'd been forced to leave this very house. Her words revealed a young woman with artistic aspirations and a passion for design, who had reluctantly set aside her creative ambitions to marry into the Davis family and assume the role of lawyer's wife. "Father says a serious career in design is impractical for a woman of my standing," she wrote. "He believes the Davis name and security should be enough to satisfy any reasonable ambition." Perhaps he is right, though my heart protests this conclusion. The parallels to my own experience were striking. 3 generations apart, we had faced similar pressure to conform to family expectations at the expense of creative passions. The difference was that I had refused to surrender my dreams, while my grandmother had reluctantly abandoned hers. I continued reading, following her journey through early marriage, motherhood, and the gradual sublimation of her creative impulses into acceptable domestic outlets, redecorating the Colonial, planning elaborate dinner parties, creating a showcase garden that became known throughout the neighborhood. "I sometimes wonder who I might have become," she wrote after my father's birth, "had I insisted on my own path rather than the one laid out before me. Would that stronger, more determined version of myself be happier? Or merely isolated from family and community that gives my life meaning?" Her questions echoed across decades, speaking directly to choices I had made and consequences I had faced. I had chosen the path she had relinquished, accepting isolation from family as the price of authenticity. The costs had been real and painful, but so had the rewards. The next day, I called my father and asked him about his mother's artistic interests, a subject he had never mentioned. "How did you know about that?" he asked, sounding genuinely surprised. Mother never discussed her design aspirations with anyone in the family, at least not that I was aware of. "I found her journal in the family documents," I explained. She wrote about giving up a place at the Design Institute to marry grandfather. A long silence followed. When my father spoke again, his voice carried unusual vulnerability. I had no idea. She was always so committed to her role as the perfect lawyer's wife, to supporting grandfather's career and maintaining our social position. Did she ever seem unhappy to you? Unfulfilled? He considered this carefully. Not unhappy exactly, but there were moments, particularly when we visited museums or attended gallery openings, when she would become unusually animated, almost transformed. I never understood why. She found ways to express her creativity, I observed. The gardens, the home, decor, the entertaining she was known for. But they were all safely contained within her expected role. Another silence stretched between us, weighted with unspoken connections to our own history. I never saw the parallel, my father finally admitted, between what might have happened to Mother's ambitions and what I tried to do to yours. You were continuing a family pattern, I suggested, not to excuse but to contextualize his actions. Prioritizing practical security over creative fulfillment, professional status over personal passion. A pattern you broke, he acknowledged, at great personal cost initially. And ultimately great personal reward, I added, both professionally and personally. That conversation led to others, gradual explorations of family history that revealed how deeply the tension between security and authenticity had shaped the Davis legacy across generations. My father began sharing memories and perspectives he had never articulated before, developing a more nuanced understanding of his own parents and the values they had instilled in him. Inspired by my grandmother's unrealized ambitions, I started a new photographic series documenting older women who had either abandoned or fulfilled creative aspirations in their youth. The project, titled The Roads Chosen, featured stark black and white portraits, paired with brief narratives about pivotal life decisions. My grandmother's journal became the centerpiece of the exhibition when it opened at a prestigious gallery downtown. Her words, enlarged on the gallery wall alongside her wedding portrait, provided context for the contemporary women whose faces and stories surrounded her. Perhaps someday, a daughter's daughter will choose differently, will find the courage to insist on her own vision of a meaningful life, whatever the consequences. I hope this unknown descendant will forgive those of us who accepted limitations she might reject, understanding that each generation can only expand possibilities within the horizon they can glimpse. The night of the opening, my parents stood before this installation, my mother wiping away tears, my father unusually silent. Later, as the crowd thinned, he approached me with an expression I hadn't seen before, a mixture of sadness and pride, regret and acceptance. "You are the daughter's daughter," she imagined, he said quietly, "the one who chose differently, who insisted on her own vision despite everything, despite me." I couldn't have known about her hopes, I replied, but perhaps some part of me was carrying them forward anyway. Legacy isn't always what we think it is, my father observed. I spent decades believing I was preserving the Davis name through the firm, through professional prestige. But perhaps the true family legacy was waiting for someone brave enough to reclaim those abandoned creative aspirations. In the months that followed the exhibition, which received national attention and critical acclaim, I found myself embracing the colonial house not just as a reclaimed space, but as the stage for a new kind of family story, one that honored both tradition and transformation, continuity and change. I invited my parents for Sunday dinners in the dining room where tense family meals had once unfolded. My mother gradually reclaimed her favorite spots in the garden, adding her touch to beds I had maintained but never fully understood. My father, retired now and exploring long-neglected interests in history and literature, spent hours in the library he had once used primarily for client meetings. The house that had witnessed my rejection now hosted regular gatherings of an expanded family circle: Uncle Robert and his partner, cousins who had supported me during difficult years, Zoe and her growing family, Elaine and our professional colleagues. The formal spaces designed for impression management relaxed into areas for authentic connection. On my 30th birthday, exactly 12 years after being thrown out with garbage bags at my feet, I hosted a garden party that symbolized the full circle of my journey. Under the century-old oak tree, surrounded by people who had supported me at various stages, I announced the creation of the Elizabeth Davis Foundation for Young Artists, a nonprofit organization providing grants to creative young people facing family opposition or financial obstacles. This foundation honors both where we come from and where we might go, I explained to the gathered guests. It acknowledges that meaningful legacies aren't always the ones we plan, and that sometimes our greatest contributions come through breaking patterns rather than preserving them. My father approached me afterward, visibly moved. "Your grandmother would have been extraordinarily proud," he said. "As am I, though I have no right to that pride given how our journey began." "The beginning doesn't determine the whole story," I replied, thinking of how far we had traveled from that rainy graduation night. "It's the middle chapters, the ones filled with hard choices and unexpected turns, that shape the ending." Later that evening, as the celebration continued around me, I stepped away briefly to the front porch. Standing in the exact spot where I had once waited with my hastily packed belongings, I allowed myself to fully appreciate the symmetry of my return. The words that had launched me on this journey, "You'll never amount to anything," had long since lost their power to wound. They had been thoroughly disproven by consistent achievement, by professional recognition, by financial security earned through creativity rather than conformity. But the true transformation wasn't measured in external markers of success. It lay in the internal freedom I had gained, the unshakable confidence that came from building a life on my own terms, the capacity for compassion that emerged from navigating both rejection and reconciliation, the wisdom to honor family connections without surrendering personal authenticity. As I rejoined my guests in the backyard, moving easily between my parents and my chosen family of friends and colleagues, I recognized that the renewal this house represented wasn't about erasing painful history or claiming vindication. It was about creating space for a new story to unfold, one that acknowledged the past without being limited by it, that incorporated painful chapters alongside moments of grace and growth. The colonial house that had once represented rigid tradition and conditional belonging had transformed, under my ownership, into something more complex and ultimately more meaningful. A place where creativity flourished alongside respect for heritage, where reconciliation coexisted with remembered hurt, where the Davis legacy continued in forms no one could have predicted when I was expelled from these same rooms a dozen years earlier. That legacy now included not just legal prestige and social standing, but artistic achievement, cultural contribution, and the courage to choose authenticity over conformity. It encompassed both the traditional values my father had championed and the creative passions my grandmother had reluctantly set aside. A fuller, more nuanced inheritance than either of them had imagined possible. In reclaiming the house, I had not only transformed a physical space, but expanded the very definition of what it meant to be a Davis, to succeed, to belong, to contribute something meaningful to the world. The circle that had begun with rejection had closed with reconciliation, not by erasing differences but by creating room for them within a larger, more generous understanding of family and legacy. The abandoned 18-year-old with garbage bags at her feet could never have imagined this outcome. But the photographer, businesswoman, and foundation director hosting her 30th birthday celebration understood that meaningful transformations rarely follow predictable paths, and that the most profound renewals often begin with painful endings. As the evening concluded and guests departed, I found myself alone in the entryway where a family portrait had once shattered. In its place, hung a new photograph, one I had taken at last year's holiday gathering. It showed 3 generations of extended Davis family, imperfectly reconciled but genuinely connected, arranged not by hierarchy, but by natural affinity, their faces reflecting not studied formality, but authentic engagement with one another. It was, I thought, the most honest family portrait the colonial house had ever displayed, and the most hopeful. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.